Sorry, I did spoil some important threads in Three Body Problem, so if you're worried about that, skip this episode, and
There might be spoilers ahead with discussions regarding Dune.
despicable. Alright, moving forward. On this podcast, I want to go over some stuff I've been reading recently. I've been doing the Three Body Problem series, which has been great. And the part I want to discuss was the very end. So I want to set it up. The Three Body Problem goes through a very, very long history of the Earth. What happens is main characters get put into hibernation and they wake up 100 years later, 200 years later, 300 years later, 400 years later. So you're staying with characters over a very broad swath of time. And whenever you interact with them again, you see the changes that humanity has gone through. Humanity knows they're going to be invaded by the Trisolarans. They're on their way to Earth, but even going as fast as they are in their spaceships, it's going to take 400 years to get here. So over that 400 years, they go through panics, through delusions, reorganizations of governments. People reunite and try to say, okay, we're going to fight them. People go into despair and say, no, we can't fight them, we're doomed. You kind of see how humanity would react to basically an apocalypse, an impending doom that's on its way. I really liked the book, and then towards the end, it really made me depressed, the very end, because it goes all the way to the end of our solar system. And what happens is our signal is detected by an alien species, and they just basically, like you would light a firework and just send it off. He basically says, hey, there's a signal from here. We don't know much about the population. We just know there's some kind of civilization over there. We're going to send a weapon. And the most advanced weapons are based off of physics. So the most fundamental laws of our universe are weaponized. And the main weapon that is used is collapsing dimensions. So they send a weapon to our solar system, basically parks close to the sun. Humanity goes to basically analyze it. They can't do anything to it, they can't touch it, they can't use any electronics on it, and they're like, what is this thing? Until they realize, like, oh my god, this is a weapon, and the weapon forces the space around it to collapse from 3 dimensions to 2 dimensions, thereby killing everything there. All the planets will be destroyed. Everything will be wiped out. So that's where I want to start on this. This passage I thought was very good, explained it very well, and I also think it shows the quality of writing that this author does. He was an engineer, so he's very logical. And also, he has a very vivid imagination. You can tell that he thinks all the way through it. He thinks, how does the character react? What is he looking at? What is happening in front of him? And it's very visual, and I appreciate that part. So, let me start here. From Pluto, the sun appeared as a giant oval. The 2-dimensional planets were tiny fragments compared to it. Unlike the planets, the sun did not display clear rings, but was separated into 3 concentric sections around a core. The center was very bright, and no details could be seen, probably corresponding to the core of the original sun. The wide ring outside the core probably corresponded to the original radiation zone, a boiling 2-dimensional bright red ocean where countless cell-like structures rapidly formed, split, combined, and disappeared in a manner that seemed chaotic, agitated, and viewed locally, but followed grand patterns and order when viewed as a whole. Outside that was the original sun's convection zone. Like in the original sun, currents of solar material transferred heat into space. But unlike the chaotic radiation zone, the new convection zone revealed clear structure, as many ring-shaped convection loops, similar in shape and size, arranged themselves side by side in neat order. The outermost layer was the solar atmosphere, golden. Currents leaped away from the circular rim and formed a large number of 2-dimensional prominences. resembling graceful dancers, cavorting wantonly around the sun. Some of the dancers even escaped the sun and drifted far into the two-dimensional universe. Is the sun still alive in 2 dimensions? Asked AA. She spoke for the hope of all 3. They all wished for the sun to continue, to give light and heat to the planet's solar system, even if there was no more life in it. But her hope was soon dashed. The flattened sun began to dim. The light from the core diminished rapidly, and soon it was possible to see fine, annular structures within. The radiation zone was also quieting, and the boiling calmed down, turning into a viscous crystallis. The loops in the convection zone distorted, broke apart, and soon disappeared. The golden dancers around the rim of the sun wilted like dried leaves and lost their vivaciousness. Now it was possible to see that at least gravity continued to function in the two-dimensional universe. The dancing solar prominences lost the support of the solar radiation and began to be dragged back to the edge of the sun by its gravity. Finally, the dancers yielded to gravity and fell lethargically into the sun's atmosphere. It was no more than a thin, smooth ring wrapped around the sun. As the sun went out, the golden arcs at the edge of the planets also dimmed, and the Earth's two-dimensional hair, formed from the sublimated ocean, lost its golden glow. Everything in the three-dimensional world died after collapsing into 2 dimensions. Nothing survived in a painting with no thickness. Perhaps a two-dimensional universe could possess its own sun, planets, and life, but they would have to be created and operate under completely different principles. I think that kind of explains, I feel like he could see it in his mind, how a sun would collapse into 2 dimensions, how that would look to an observer from the outside, and how it's spreading from the sun into the planets, collapsing them from 3 dimensions into 2 dimensions, flattening them out. I think it's really cool. What do you think?
It's very obvious to me that he's articulate, and he's obviously, if I didn't know the author was an engineer, I would probably think, well, he has to have some background, or he just spent a lot of time researching these words, because the way he kind of explained what was happening with the collapsing, I guess, of the dimensions was interesting. When I think about that, I also think about Dungeons and Dragons, because my first introduction to pocket dimensions was playing Baldur's Gate, and also understanding that there's in Forgotten Realms, there's the 7 hells, there's the Shadow Realm, there's the Ethereal Realm, there's all these realms that are like, if you...
And the elementals, they each have their own realm.
Yeah, like if you think about a book, and each page in that book, not opening it, but you just keep it closed, each page in that book represents a realm, right? And they're all layered on top of each other. And that's how I kind of started to conceptualize time as circular, but also like a constant. That you can bend, you can't break it, but it can bend. And if you can bend it, you can penetrate it. But you just need to have the technology to be able to do that. In Dungeons & Dragons, it's easy because obviously there's magic, there's religion that provides you with the tools to be able to travel from one realm to the other. I guess that's magic and powers provided by gods. But
you know, in string theory, I don't know how they do it, but they calculate that there should be 11 dimensions. We only know about 4, but they say it goes up to that. It works mathematically. I don't understand mathematics enough to do it, but apparently it makes sense that there would have to be 11 dimensions.
I feel like I think that gets into like quantum mechanics as well.
It's stuff like that. So, and I thought that's what this works with. He is assuming, I don't think we even know if string theory is correct, but he's assuming that, let's say that's true, right? What he's saying is that life forms have been in war for so long throughout the universe, remember, billions of years old, that it used to be an 11-dimensional structure, but through all the wars it has collapsed all the way from 11 to 3. So we're basically at the bottom. We're at 3 dimensions now. Aliens have destroyed all those other dimensions fighting each other. So now we're down to 3, and that's collapsing to 2. See what I'm saying? I think this is another passage that explains it really well. And read this one. He says, "You told me that you came from the sea. Did you build the sea? are you saying that for you, or at least for your creators, this 4-dimensional space is like the sea for us? More like a puddle. The sea has gone dry. Why are so many ships or tombs gathered in such a small space? When the sea is dry, the fish have to gather into puddles. The puddle is also dry, and all the fish are going to disappear. Are all the fish here? The fish responsible for drying the sea are not here. We're sorry. What you said is really hard to understand. So this is one of the characters talking to an AI, and basically is trying to explain to her that there used to be this giant ocean, which was all the dimensions. But due to the wars, it has shrunk down to a puddle, which is our 4 dimensions, that 3 dimensions plus time. And even that is shrinking. And they explain that the ones who caused this to happen, they're long gone. We're just the creatures that have survived. It doesn't say. But there's a point in the book where they pass through a piece of a higher dimensional space, and they see all these spaceships built by long extinct alien species gathered there, because that's one of the last spots they can survive. Because as that space slowly gets consumed by 3 dimensions, it will kill everything in there. It's saying that the universe is much grander and even more amazing than we can even imagine, more populated than we can ever imagine, but it has been destroyed by, well, the dark forest theory that comes up in the book, where if there is some species that's light years away, you don't know if it's hostile, you don't know if it's nice. And by the time you get to them, to talk to them, you don't know if they've advanced far beyond you. Even if you're advanced, maybe in the 400 light years it takes to get to them, they surpass you. Now they can dominate you. Now they know where you come from. Now they know where you are. So it's better just to kill them before you even have contact with them.
Or not let them know you're there.
Or that, which is also a strategy used in the book, where you can cloak your solar system. I don't exactly understand what it is, but basically you can have ships with warp drives that cause a bubble basically around your solar system that slows time to almost zero. So because time is slowed, when you look in that part of space, you wouldn't see a solar system, because all that light that's coming off the sun would be slowed so much that it wouldn't ever exit the solar system. So nothing would really be able to get in, because the speed of light is the threshold that anything can go. So nothing can go in, nothing can come out, but at least you're protected. It's like a shield. But it's a shield that traps you in that part of space. You can't get out either, but you are protected from other people trying to infiltrate.
But wouldn't that be what's happening with all those other ships?
What do you mean?
Well, you said that there was a passage in the book where you can see all these other ships. They're just existing.
No.
Maybe they're existing.
They're not existing in a bubble. Basically what happens is, when whatever civilization built those ships, they existed in a higher dimension.
Okay, but you said all those other dimensions are gone.
Yes. So basically what happened is, somebody used a weapon on those people, and the space around them has been collapsing into 3 dimensions. But they're in a pocket that hasn't collapsed yet. It's still 4 dimensions plus. So they're living for a while. But as the space around them is collapsing, eventually their small 4-dimensional space will also collapse. And then they will be gone.
But you said that you could exist in a bubble, though. Right?
Well, a solar system. So, basically what happens is...
Well, why couldn't they exist in that bubble?
What I'm saying is, those people who are in that dimensional pocket, right? Obviously they weren't protected. Because if they were, that weapon would have never reached them.
See, D&D teaches us that there's a way to get in and there's a way to get out. Just because you think you're trapped doesn't necessarily mean you are. Even when you're put into a sphere, like Luke's resilient sphere, you can still get out of it. But somebody has to, exactly. Yeah. Somebody has to dispel it. So somebody has to allow you to get out.
In this case,
otherwise
because he's using physics physics as a weapon, physics as a shield. What happens is the speed of light cannot be overcome, as far as we know.
I don't know. I think those species are going to be in a future books. I think it's possible. It's only mentioned once.
What?
That these other races in the 4 dimensions and above.
Well, it's hinted at because they're all dead.
Because it's assumed that they're dead.
Well, it does reveal later in the book that a lot of species have made dimensional pockets to hide into. Right? And that's what happens at the end of the book, is that so many species have built their dimensional pockets and filled it, right? Because what are you going to put in the dimensional pocket? You've got to put land. You've got to put whatever crops you grow. You've got to put housing, right?
It's very interesting.
So once you put it all in there, you're taking mass from the universe.
This kind of reminds me of the metaphor, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Because when I think of D&D, where did this idea, because Gygax, the creator of D&D, they didn't just get these ideas from themselves, right? They had to have, like, alternate dimensions. There used to just be the material plane in the Forgotten Realms. But the more you play the game, you realize, well, there's more than to this game than what you see. There's what's behind what you can see, and then there's what behind what you can see, and so on and so forth. But they had to be inspired by science fiction.
Well, I think it goes both ways.
Yeah,
I mean,
for
I
sure.
think that they've inspired each other. I think that, I don't know, but if I had to speculate, it's probably originally from fantasy. Because I think once you make up jinns, you make up elementals, which I think go back pretty far. When you make up spirits, you make up souls and gods.
Because like elementals are like,
where are they
they're
existing?
based in like science and physics.
No. What I'm saying is, in fantasy, where are these things coming from? Where are they existing? On another plane of existence, right? So I think the idea of other dimensions probably came from fantasy, and then as physicists worked on it, that influenced fantasy backwards, right? So now they're influencing fantasy, coming up with this idea of how dimensions work and how many there are. So I think they play with each other, but it's probably originated in fantasy.
I think you're right that there's probably like a give and take. Creators like Ed Greenwood and I think Gary Gygax is his name. They read a lot of science fiction, and then they pull certain elements of the books that they're reading into their world, and then they build it.
Yeah. It makes sense. That's how it works. It's an artistic recombination of real world stuff, fantasy from, like, we're going to talk about soon Dune. What is that? That's a combination of Middle Eastern.
Oh my God, there's so
right?
much
There's a combination
everything.
of Christianity,
And
of feudalism.
Sure.
There's so many ideas that they're reading about on their own, and then they're combining in unique ways to make an artistic piece.
So that's what's so interesting. You mentioned Fermi's paradox.
Well, not now, but yes.
Well, you said the dark forest theory.
The idea of dark forest is also an explanation in the book of, like you're saying, why don't we see other species out there? Why don't we interact with any? Well, the solution in this book is because anyone who feels like they should interact with some other species, due to dark forest theory, they get annihilated. So any species who has a will to contact other species, they've already been wiped out. Because
Is that do you believe that?
I hope, and I suspect that there are other species out there in the universe. So, like,
in our universe, or maybe neighboring universe?
No, I'm saying in this universe. I'm saying that
Our universe
not this
is pretty
solar
big.
system. I'm talking about this universe, right?
Yeah.
If you look, I encourage anybody, look at, I think it's the deep field image where NASA focused on a very small piece of our sky and they let it sit there. I think it's for either weeks or months. And you can zoom in and zoom in and zoom in to just millions and millions of galaxies. And when you see that, you have to say to yourself, there has to be something out there.
Well, and then
But that doesn't mean that they're technically advanced.
Right.
And even if they are, we're just assuming in fiction. We assume that, we'll find a way to go light speed. What if it's not possible? What if it's not possible to make portals? What if it's not possible to make wormholes? Right? Maybe that stuff is just fiction. If it is, then they can never reach us. And even if it is possible, which I think is more likely, is how do we know they just didn't blow themselves up? I mean, humans have the technology to kill ourselves. I suspect we will kill ourselves if we don't make a backup drive on Mars or the moon, right? So, if you don't consciously make an effort to put humans or whatever species you are somewhere else, what's to say you won't blow yourself up, destroy the planet you're on, release diseases that kill most of your population, right? If you look at the history of humans, we had rare people who made discoveries that only one or two people in the whole earth ever made, and we built off those discoveries to have some other rare person make even more discoveries, right? We got lucky. Is every species going to be that lucky? No. So I think they're out there, but can they reach us?
No, the question that I believe is discussed in varying degrees is, yes, there's life out there, but what type of life? There's plant life, there's single cell organisms, there's different types of life that could exist. And the question is,
do they reach sentience? Think about how many, the percent of creatures on this planet that have no conscience, they can't think about things.
People, I think it's the height of ignorance to assume that we are the most intelligent creatures.
Oh, I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I really don't think we're that intelligent. I think that very few of us strive to be more than those around us. And how you do that is by, I think, reading and pushing yourself to learn more and go beyond the limits of what you think you can comprehend. So people who teach like physics and teach quantum mechanics and string theory, these are individuals. They're like the 1% of the 1% of the 1%. There's not very many. There are professors who are teaching these courses at Ivy League schools, and there's like very few people who can really understand what they're talking about.
Yeah, there's subjects where there's literally less than 100 people on the planet who really understand.
Yeah, that's pretty stark, because that basically says we don't have the intelligence collectively or in enough supply to solve the bigger problems. And I guess one of them might be, how can we traverse our solar system in a reasonable amount of time and our universe in a reasonable amount of time and harness that power to do so. There's been discussions about utilizing solar sail and sending bursts of light to the solar sail to kind of continuously accelerate the speed at which the solar sail can be able to travel, so it's traveling at 1/3 the speed of light or something to that effect, that's interesting. But can it carry a payload, in humans? Is that something that is applicable to space travel?
Once you realize that the thing is the distances. When you realize how long it would take to get to the nearest star, traveling at even half the speed of light is ambitious. Okay?
Yeah.
So it could take hundreds and hundreds and hundreds just to one near star.
What do you
think about the time
it
would take?
Do you think nuclear power would help cut that down if we harness that power in an engine?
This is why Star Trek and Star Wars, they have fake drives. They have warp drives and stuff. Yeah. Because we don't even have the concept of something that could do what you're saying. To get us close to the speed of light, to warp somewhere, right? To go into hyperdimensional space. You don't have that tech. It's just an idea. It's just something to solve a problem. How the hell do we get all the way over there? Well, we gotta make something up in fiction to get us there, right? But we don't have anything close to that.
And I think that's also part of the problem. So, just going back to what I said, I don't want to make it sound like we're stupid apes, but in some ways we are. I mean, there's a lot. So people specialize, right? Like people who practice BJJ, they can be a fantastic striker and a good grappler, but usually you don't find a blend of the two. It's either one or the other. And the same, I think, is true of the sciences and the STEM fields. There's not a job for somebody who learns string theory. A theoretical physicist that's working at like some Ivy League school, and they're working on research that could be groundbreaking, could lead to other additional discoveries and breakthroughs. But usually it's just like a handful of people. And so if it's only one person kind of doing this thing in isolation, are they really going to have a breakthrough? An example that comes to mind is the Manhattan Project. Like there was a number of individual people working individually on different parts related to the Manhattan Project. But that's the thing. There was the purpose that was provided to these people. They were collected and put into a room to solve problems, and the goal was to develop an atomic bomb.
And they had the pressure, right? If you don't do it, Russia will do it.
Yeah. So they had
Germany will
carrot
do
and
it.
the stick.
Somebody will do it if we don't get to it first.
Right.
We have to get it to it first. So there was an incredible amount of motivation.
Yeah. But conversely, there was also the downside of that. I mean, obviously, oh gosh, what's the famous quote from...
I have become death, destroyer of worlds.
That's it, thank you.
Yeah.
And that's a quote from the Bhagavad Gita. And I think that's kind of sad, because a lot of the scientists, they get into it for altruistic reasons, but then they're kind of dismayed by the ways in which the science inevitably is used. But I also think that's kind of inevitable too throughout history. So Neil deGrasse Tyson has this book called Accessory to War. Mm-hmm. In that book, he quotes a lot of like public information from the United States government, and then he even goes back into antiquity and the Greek states, and he discusses that basically the theme of the book is that military conflict or military technology is usually the pathway by which technology advances. Agree with it or deny it, it doesn't matter. It's a fact that conflict begets more conflict, but technology also advances during these conflicts.
It forces a country to advance or lose.
Yeah, or die.
Yeah.
So it's adapt or die, essentially. One example that he mentioned that I thought was pretty interesting is when the Greeks were fighting the Persians, they deployed, and I may be butchering the actors here, but in any event, the Greeks may have been fighting each other, but anyway, what they did was they deployed the power of the sun. So what did? They created this big ass mirror that could articulate, and you could redirect the beam of the sun onto a target. And so what they ended up doing was they redirected the sun's beam onto approaching ships. Because they were wood and because they had cloth sails, they would catch fire. If the beam was focused, and so essentially
a magnifying glass.
Essentially, as a magnifying glass, but they weaponized it. That weaponization piece I thought was very fascinating, because I certainly see that time and again. Conflicts going back all the way to ancient times, from ancient times forward, there's always some new deployment of a technology that's brought to bear that changes the course of a conflict, changes the course of a battle. In certain pivotal battles, you see that there is some new technology or some old technology with some minor changes to it that grant a significant edge. Mm-hmm. Going back to these races that you talked about, or these civilizations, races, species, but one of the things that I think is interesting to think about projecting forward, but also making those comparisons to ancient history, is races can destroy themselves, groups of people can destroy themselves by utilizing these weapons irresponsibly. They have unintended consequences. So a quick example would be Greek fire, which I think burned blue or green.
From what I remember, it was that oil was bubbling up from the sea and washing ashore.
Yeah.
And
so
they lit it afire and they used it as catapult ammo.
Yeah, so in a naval battle against significant odds, the Greeks started just lobbing Greek fire at these Persian ships, and they caught fire immediately, but so did the Greek ships. So it wasn't as if they were without consequence for using this weapon. And also, the Greek states fought with each other
continuously,
quite often. So it's not as if these weapons wouldn't be brought to bear against their brothers and sisters. No, they were. It's interesting to see that even with advanced weaponry, that's the thing with weaponry, is anything you use can be used against you. I haven't read the three-body problem. The fact that there's like a 400-year period of existence where humans are having to play catch-up, that doesn't surprise me at all. And this goes back to the Fermi paradox. Do you think it's possible that an advanced species has visited Earth?
No, and I'll tell you why. I think humans think they're important. Humans think they're interesting. Humans think other aliens would find humans something to investigate. The issue is there could be super advanced aliens out there, super intelligent aliens that see us as ants.
Sure.
We are not interesting.
But there could also be versions of aliens that are interested in our existence, that outpace us technologically, and they want to keep an eye on us.
See, I think that's the hope of humans. We hope someone's interested enough to look into us and abduct us and probe us and take our DNA.
That's also
it is our own vanity.
The X-Files basically projects this theory that there's a shadow government, and the shadow government is controlled by an alien species. Now, I don't know how much of a connection you want to make to the deep state and these other comments and conspiracy theories. I mean, I think a lot of these conspiracy theories, they did originate out of like episodes of X-Files, to be quite honest. And even the rebooted series, they kind of start to own it. The government is doing things, like they're controlling certain aspects of the media. But I think there's some truth to what you're saying, which is people like to believe these stories. These stories have meaning to certain people. And
it all starts with aliens are really interested in us. They want to breed with us. They want our DNA. They want to control us. We think we're so important, so interesting, that of course another species will be interested in us. The truth is, we're probably in the ghetto of the universe.
But the Trisolarians, they want to come to Earth.
Why do they want to come to Earth?
Well, they want to control. They want to take over Earth, and they want to enslave us.
No. The Trisolarians live in a very volatile, extremely hazardous solar system. We live in a very stable orbit around our sun. We have predictable weather, and they want the planet. They don't give a damn about us. They're going to wipe us out, and they're going to live here. That's their plan, at least. And so, yeah, they want us because of stability. So that's it.
You talk about the Trisolarians in all-encompassing terms. You use them and they, and that's what they all want. But initially, when contact was made with the Trisolarians, apparently there was a sympathetic Trisolarian who received the message and sent a warning back to the sender. Hey, don't message us again.
Yes.
You're lucky you got in contact with me. I'm not like the others.
Yeah.
I am sympathetic. Mm-hmm. I believe other life should exist, but not everybody. My people don't believe that.
Mm-mm. Yep, that's true. But he was the lucky exception. Their thoughts can be beamed to each other, so there is no mediation. I can see directly into your brain, you can see directly into mine. And so one of the first problems Trisolarians had with humans is they found out that they can say something that they're not thinking. They can act differently than how they're really meaning to act.
I remember seeing
and so
that
it confuses
episode.
them.
Well, I was confused by that episode because I didn't understand what that meant. Basically, the way I'm going to understand this is that they're kind of like the Protoss. The Protoss, they share thoughts, right? They share happiness, they share joy, they share sadness as a people. But there's also variations of the Protoss, right? There's Dark Templar. The Dark Templar, they decided that they wanted to be individuals. They didn't want to be part of a collective. And that was very controversial to the Protoss people in general on the planet Ire because they all could connect to each other. And if you didn't want to be part of that collective, you were considered an outcast, so you had to leave. And that's what ended up being the Dark Templar.
And the problem is, if there was somebody who wanted to leave or go rogue on Trisolaris, the problem is the planet is super harsh. So it has a weird orbit around the sun. And sometimes it's scorching hot. Sometimes it's completely frozen. There are rare moments where it is a reasonable temperature. And that's when they dehydrate themselves during the bad periods and they rehydrate themselves during good periods. And if you do not get the timing right, obviously you're dead. That's it. So anybody who went rogue or thought differently or resisted, they would be wiped out because there's no surviving the planet. The planet is way too harsh to live in. So there is a very collective group social organization on that planet.
Now, what do you think about the idea of telepathic communication?
I think it would, listen, it's a double-edged sword.
Do you believe it exists?
No.
In what sense? Just in general, or?
There's an easy way for someone to prove this to me. Beam your thoughts into my head. So I've argued with someone about this at work. I said, why is a telepath arguing with someone else on a podcast or on a radio show? Why doesn't the person just say, why are you communicating with the microphone? Turn the microphone off and just beam your thoughts and words you're going to say into my brain and I will react to them. But you can't. See? The fact that a telekinetic person, whatever the hell they're called, has to use a phone, has to use Skype or whatever the hell, it proves that they don't have the power. If they had the ability, they would just contact you immediately through their minds.
So I think there's types of telepathic.
Well, tell me about it.
All right, so one that comes to mind is in sports. In soccer, you have midfield and you have forwards, you have defenders. Generally, everybody, especially at the professional level, everybody should know where they have to be. But at times, telepathic connections that can be established between players like in the midfield and forwards, who they play with each other so much, they practice with each other so much, they know their tendencies, they know their inclinations, they know how, as a forward, they need to make a run for a particular situation, that the midfielder is going to send the ball to you as a right forward, and that you have to start making that run. And as soon as you start making that run, that's when that ball is going to be released. And you're going to be released to go get it in the corner to possibly create an opportunity in front of goal by crossing it. So I've seen that a lot, where telepathic connection between people. And also like relationships. You just know what the other person is thinking, given the certain situation. Now, I'm not saying that there's telepathy in the sense that, you know, we could have a podcast just by looking at each other and sharing thoughts, like in Babylon 5. Like an entire conversation between these telepaths could be shared in the span of 10 seconds that would take you and I like an hour to get through. No, that doesn't exist. Now, who's to say it doesn't exist in the future? I mean,
with tech, it could exist. I'm saying we don't naturally have the ability to do that. But I think with implants, of course, it's possible.
Like brain-computer interfaces, brain-machine interfaces.
Just like we have Wi-Fi and stuff like that. You're telling me you can't have an implant, and I have an implant, and we're all on the whatever global network in the future, and I can just think something to you, think it to me? I think it's possible.
We're on a brain-computer interface Discord.
Yeah. But basically, I'll tell you what you're talking about, and I've seen this, as you know. I'm not much anymore, but I used to be an avid Discovery watcher show, right? Mm-hmm. And I've watched many a documentary on lions. And lions, when they go out to hunt, without speaking to each other, they know who they're selecting. They know where they're going to push them. And who's waiting for them on the other side. And how to angle them into it without ever saying a word.
But is that instinct or is that...
Exactly. It's instinct plus knowing who you're working with and knowing the goal. When you know these things, because we have pattern recognition, problem-solving brains, you're recognizing and seeing patterns from many experiences. And so all these lionesses that are hunting, they've interacted with each other for a very long time. They know what the goal is that they're trying to do. And they can assume, okay, I'm going for this one. I bet you the other one's going for this one. I'm going to push them this way because it makes sense how the grass is. That's the best way to push them. I would hide here, so they're probably hiding there. Right? They have no way to talk to each other, but yet they execute it perfectly. How? Instinct, pattern recognition.
But that's not to say that at some degree there is some level of understanding. Where in that example you give about the packs of lions hunting together, what if someone slips the noose? What if somebody slips the trap? A bull elephant comes in and it completely ruins their trap. Well, what do? Now they have to adjust.
But this is the thing. Same thing. Now,
obviously, that may not always happen, though.
Obviously, animals obviously get away. That happens, right? They outsmart the pack. But even in those situations, they know how the other person would adapt to those changes.
But not
so
every
they
situation
still
is
execute the kill, given the variables that you're talking about.
I think Alexander was taught, I forget who his teacher was, but Alexander the Great was basically taught that no two situations are always the same. There may be similarities between those situations, and then you can recognize patterns that allow you to adapt and become a little bit more flexible as a result of those new and changing situations.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing like Mark Twain said, that history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes.
Yes, that's a fantastic analogy to basically highlight that there's going to be similarities for sure, and that doesn't mean that you can't pull from your experience to use judgment to now adapt to a changing and evolving situation. But I still think at some level there has to be unspoken communication, because you can still have all those elements: experience, wisdom, the ability to adapt, make a good judgment call, but you're still going to be reacting based on what those around you are doing.
That's what I'm saying. I think a lot of it has to do with pattern recognition that we see consciously and unconsciously. And that the unconscious part is what makes us think like, wait, that was weird. How did I know to do that? Or how did he know how to do that?
So that's an interesting segue, I think, into Dune then, because, you know,
Okay, so you want to talk about Dune?
Okay, so we were discussing pattern recognition being something that humans are really good at. So we recognize patterns for risk, opportunity, threat, desire, love, etc., all these emotions. And one of the things that I think is very interesting in Frank Herbert's Dune is that is essentially what Paul Atreides is capable of doing. He's able to, as a male Bene Gesserit, he's able to take the patterns, take information that he either is given or is aware of through history or word of mouth, and form that information into a cohesive prediction. He can go a step further by, and this process is called prescience. He's able to, through utilization of the information that he has gathered, create a prediction based on his prescience, and then foresee that future.
And now, I've never read the Dune books, but I have listened to this great YouTuber called Quinn's Ideas. He has fantastic Dune videos. I think the concepts in Dune are amazing. I just think that I'm not really interested in reading that much, so I don't want to take on the Dune saga. Well, you've been reading the books,
yeah.
So give us a history of Paul then, Paul now. I don't think you're done with the third book, right?
No, I'm not done.
Okay, so where do you think he's going? What's he doing? Give us a kind of a general idea.
So the first book is basically the saga of Paul Atreides surviving the events that befall his family. In that journey, he finds that he becomes something more. Essentially, he becomes what the Bene Gesserit have been looking for all along, which is the Kwisatz Haderach, which is the one who's able to see forward and backwards, but also tap into male strengths as well as female strengths. And it's very interesting. He basically survives an attack on his family, and then he has to recollect himself and become what he's afraid to become, which is a messiah, essentially. And he knows that in so doing, there's going to be decisions that are going to have to be made in order to survive. So it seems as if destiny is constantly pushing him down this path. And there's this interesting quote in the book. I feel as if the jihad has a life of its own. whether I'm the leader or not, it's taking on a life of its own. Life has been breathed into the jihad, and it's going to occur whether I'm the leader or not. And I thought that was fascinating to think about, that a movement could exist without a leader. Like, a people could rally behind this idea and then see it to fruition without kind of having an appointed leader to do it. And
it's like the movement pulls other people along
into it.
Yeah, it's not like they're leading it forward. The movement is like a life form that's pulling everything into it, even the leader into it.
And
well,
even,
the supposed leader.
Yeah, and even Paul Atreides recognizes that he's a slave to it. He may be the de facto leader of the movement, but he also recognizes through his prescience that he isn't really in control of anything. That's ultimately the paradox of his story, is that while he's trying to become the leader, he's not really the leader, and these events are going to unfold, whether in a manner that he doesn't want them to unfold. His concern being that millions, if not, and actually billions, end up dying as a result of his taking on the mantle of being Muad'Dib, or the Messiah from a people, and a war that engulfs the entire galaxy is waged in his name, and it's a holy war.
And I want you to talk about the prescience thing, because I love the idea in Dune that what are the effects of prescience? How does it? What are the benefits, but also the detriments of it? It's actually a curse to him.
Yes.
And I know you've already got to this part in the book, but he even gets blinded.
Yeah.
But that doesn't affect him because he still sees.
Yeah. It seems as if being blinded makes him see more, which is an interesting oxymoron, I guess, to think about. Because, and also, in Fremen society, anybody who's blinded is given to Shai Hulud. They're given to the desert. They cannot strengthen the tribe, they can only weaken it. When that happens, he spares no expense for the people that are protecting him to provide them with new eyes to see, but he refuses to take on a new set of eyes and prefers instead to retain his hollow sockets. That was an interesting decision. The benefit for Paul is that he's now able to metamorphize into another person, which is the preacher. And then you hear about him in Children of Dune, and when he becomes blinded is at the end of Dune Messiah. And then he basically goes into the desert, and people believe that he died.
And I want to speak on that for a minute, because I think that is such a powerful imagery that he pulled into that book. Because how many religions, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, talk about the wandering prophet coming out of the desert and teaching you something or leading you somewhere? It is such a
strong symbolism.
Yes, the symbol, the myth has existed with humanity forever, and it makes so much sense that it would appear again here.
Yeah.
It's the same symbol.
See, I didn't even think about that until you brought it up, but you're right. There's some parallels with, especially Christianity, which is the one I think we're probably both most familiar with. And we can go back to that in a second, or whenever you want, but the idea about prescience is something that it's not really new. I think that in general, prescience is considered like on the same level as telepathy, telekinesis, things like that. It's something that exists, but how do you do it? And I think we've talked about this offline, that I have some suspicions about the author's background, and this is one of them, because there's a data collection aspect to this character, Paul Atreides, and what he's doing. He already has the skill to be able to piece together disparate pieces of information, link them together, and come to a relatively realistic conclusion about a potential future that could possibly exist. He's taking data that he is familiar with, data that he's given, he's piecing it together, and he's predicting a potential future with a high level of confidence, while allowing room for other events to knock his prediction off course. He accepts that. You're coming up with an ex ante, but the level of confidence that he has going into that ex ante is pretty high. It's fascinating to think about that in terms of the economy, in terms of politics, in terms of military conflict.
But I mean, it's that, and he does have prescience in the sense of seeing futures, because you can talk about this, the golden path. He does see something. He sees a path forward that he takes out of many possible paths.
Well, that's his son.
Well, I mean, yeah, obviously,
Leto.
yeah, you're right. He doesn't complete that path, but he does go on a journey on it for a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
But then he, like you said, he doesn't complete it.
Well, there's two types of prescience. There's the one that's induced by the spice melange.
Ooh.
And there's the other that is innate. And Paul has the innate prescience, but it's also augmented by the spice. So it allows him to kind of see more potential futures, sift through them, and be able to grab the ones that are more likely to occur. Contrasted with his sister, Aaliyah Atreides. That's just a sad storyline for her. She has elements of the prescience because she's preborn. So preborn Atreides children from Jessica's line and Leto Atreides' line, they are able to have the thoughts, memories, and experiences of those who came before them thousands of years prior. Probably tens of thousands of years prior. It goes back far.
Which is crazy to even think about.
Yeah, it hurts my head to
think of many lifetimes extending back into the past.
Yeah.
And you have those egos,
yeah,
that information existing in your mind.
Yeah.
That's crazy to even think about.
Yeah, I mean, and there's the scene with Aaliyah where you're right, and all these voices are going on in her head at the same time. In modern day terms, people who you see talking to themselves or as if they're talking to somebody, you would consider that they're either bipolar, schizophrenic. But in the story, though, she's having conversations with multiple people in the same manner in her head, and she's talking to them in real life. And her guards see this, and they become concerned. There's one figure, and this is in Children of Dune, where Aaliyah starts to succumb to possession. And it's a very familiar villain who rears
Listen,
head.
go ahead and say it. This is the Dune saga. If people have not read Dune, when did it come out? 1950s, 1960s? Somewhere in the 60s, I think.
Yeah, well,
if you have not read Dune by now, that's on you.
Alright, well, so the Duke Harkonnen basically comes in and offers her some respite. Basically, he says, I can quiet the voices for you if you just give me some time in the real world. And he says, look what I can do. And everything gets quiet in her head. And she's very thankful. And of course, because she's addicted to the spice melange now, and the voices get louder, and she can't control them. So she succumbs to what's known as an abomination, possession. And she has to go through the trial of possession, which is in Fremen culture, the test to determine if you truly are possessed. I haven't got to the point where she's actually taken the test, and from what I've read so far, it looks like she's not going to take the test, but she's able to avoid it. But so that's her tragedy.
There's so many ideas in Dune that I find fascinating. I mean, well, like I said, I love the idea of prescience. I love the idea of the prophet Messiah. I love the idea that you could have ancestral memories and egos going back infinitely in time, existing in your mind. There's just so many unique and cool ideas that come together in these books. It just shows you how smart Frank Herbert was to be playing with these ideas.
He touched on something that I think it was out of time and place given the era that the books were written. And he reminded me of something I wanted to talk about, which was, so Aaliyah, she is able to have prescience because she's preborn. She can do some of the things that Paul can do, but not with the same level of accuracy and precision. So in order for her to have prescience, she needs to use the spice. And she becomes addicted to the spice. And that's also part of the reason why she becomes an abomination, is because of her addiction to spice. Now, if you want to draw some parallels here to drug addiction and how getting to the next plane of thinking and existence by using drugs, have at it. These are thoughts I had as I was reading.
It does happen to people. Like, so as far as I know, it's been a long time since I've seen it, but I know I saw a show where people who are, like, let's say you have a history of schizophrenia in your family, but it's not active in you. Taking certain opiates and stuff and getting overdoses on drugs can activate that non-active disability that exists in your genes. It can trigger it. And I remember seeing a thing where a guy who's completely normal, he almost OD'd, I think it was on cocaine, and then afterwards, he had completely lost it. So he kept hearing voices telling him he's about to die. He was scared that people are following him. He had super active paranoia. So he's always trying to hide from people. He thought people were under the ground, digging towards him. He thought people had infiltrated his Wi-Fi, his phones, all this stuff. So he went from being basically a normal guy to super paranoid, super schizophrenic, from almost ODing on the spice.
I've watched Dune 1 and 2 at least 15 times. I'm not embellishing.
No, I
have literally watched it at least 15 times.
I'd come over and you were watching it like almost every time I came over for a month. There was a time where it was just Dune. I mean, I was studying it. That's how in depth I got. So I paid very close attention to every word. And did the movies make you want to read the books, or what made you want to read the books?
Yeah, it was the movies for sure. It wasn't the graphic novels. No, it was the movie. Because I guess what hooked me is I could tell through the visuals that there was more going on. There was subtext, there was nuance that I wasn't grasping. So to really understand that world, I felt like I had to dive into the books.
That makes sense.
So I mean, it's a positive for marketing, I guess. You know, if I mean, I don't know if the movies themselves are advertisements for the books, then it did a really good job, because I was immediately hooked by the story. And we did see the 1984, the original Dune, completely different.
Oh yeah.
Completely different.
Listen,
Obviously,
people
it was out of time,
diss it. This is the thing. Sometimes something can be bad but have its own charm.
Yeah.
For me, I enjoyed the movies, even though I would agree with someone, hey, the acting isn't that great, the setting isn't that great, the following of the storyline isn't that great. Okay, given all that, I still enjoyed watching the movies. So
I think I've told you that, you know, I initially tried to watch the original Dune and I fell asleep. But then I woke up at a part where they were fighting, and I think I had caught like maybe up the first, 5 minutes, and then I fell asleep for like an hour, and I woke up at another point, and then I was remembering the opening scenes and then connecting that with what I was just watching, which was like an hour later. I think for me, what happened was the character who was playing Paul Atreides in the original, he had to go to the desert, and from what I recall in the opening scenes of that original movie is that they're talking about Arrakis, but they don't start the movie on Arrakis. So I started it over from the part that I remembered, and then I continued on from there, and then everything kind of coalesced. And I started to realize, oh, this is actually like a really good movie. Honestly, the technology that's used, for instance, the shields that they used, oh my god. I mean, it's pretty bad.
It's goofy, right? But it's still. I still enjoy it.
It's blocky. If you put like a PS5 in front of somebody and a Nintendo, you're gonna see a difference. In the new movies, what we find is like it's much cleaner, and so there's a lot more content from the books and the world that can be embedded into the movie. Just very quickly, one thing that I did not like is that Thafir Hawat, I may be getting the name wrong, he's basically the Atreides Mentat. He just disappears. So like when the Atreides are attacked, nobody knows where he goes. So in movies 1 and 2, he doesn't make an appearance, which I thought was kind of weird. In the original, he's there at the end and he follows actually the books very closely, where he decides to, because he believes that the Atreides have been killed, and then he doesn't realize that because he's been hired by the Harkonnen to now work for them. He doesn't realize that he's working against the Atreides, and then at the end he realizes that he's been used. But even through his own machinations, he's been trying to pit Fade Rotha against his uncle, the Duke Harkonnen, by planting an assassination attempt and encouraging Nabarin to kill his uncle so that he could take over. So he's kind of working behind the scenes in the employ of the Harkonnens, because Peter, the original Mentat, was killed in that assassination attempt by Leto as his final act. So anyway, that's an interesting difference between the old versus the new. It was kind of weird that they didn't include the Fear Hawat, but you don't really notice it. You really don't even notice it. If you read the book, then you kind of realize, oh, after watching the movie, you're just like, oh, wait a second. Yeah, he fucked off after the attack, and we're left to wonder where he went.
And actually, what we could talk about too is we watched the show, the Dune Prophecies. What do you think about that?
There's a lot of room for improvement. Now, let me preface by saying, look, the standout acting by Travis Fimmel. I loved him in Viking as Ragnar Lothbrok. He brought that character to life, and even in death, that character had a great final act. I've read that apparently Dune Prophecy had been in production hell for half a decade.
I read the same thing.
Yeah, and I thought that was like, well, I mean, it kind of makes sense. Which came first, the series or the movies?
Yeah, there was continuity problems that I saw in the show.
Yeah.
And then when I read like, oh, this has been struggling for a very long time, and I said, oh, I can see. So that's why that happened. There's some people who had one storyline, probably got changed or edited, and eventually they just had what they had.
Yeah,
so they had to piece it together somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were both pretty excited to watch it.
Yeah.
But I think we also concluded that, and I think maybe Quinn's idea is brought at this point, like, the final episode was like an hour and a half, and what they could have done was like shot 4 episodes as an hour and a half with more content, and probably even cut the budget in half by doing that. I think there's some validity to that comment. One thing that did catch my attention is that Travis Flammel's character, I forget his name, but he is basically the product of a coupling between a Harkonnen and an Atreides. And this isn't the first time that happens, right? Paul discovers it after drinking the spice of life, or being given the water of life. And he discovers that Duke Harkonnen is his grandfather. So he's also the product of a Harkonnen Atreides coupling, because Jessica is the daughter of a Duke Harkonnen, and she marries Duke Leto Atreides, and then they have Paul. And there's a parallel there that I think isn't going to be explained anytime soon. But to think that 10,000 years before the events of Paul Atreides, there was another coupling between a Harkonnen and an Atreides, I think that there could be some tangential connection to the Kwisatz Haderach between those two houses. There has to be. I can't place my finger on it, but the fact that they included it tells me that there is. I thought the show was okay. There were certain elements that didn't make sense to me.
I really liked the 2 older women. What were they? Tula and
I forget her name.
Yeah, I forget too. But anyway, the 2 older sisters.
She's the basically the leader of the Bene Gesserit during that period of time.
So the two, I think they did a good job. The two older versions did a good job. I like the fact that they were using tech. They shouldn't be using tech, but
like
the
AI.
But there was an AI computer system that was keeping records and making suggestions of who their breeding programs should bring together. So the idea that they had secretly been using tech, which they shouldn't be using, in order to refine and keep records for their breeding program, I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and it runs counter to the laws of the time because they have just finished, perhaps within the past
100 years,
couple hundred years, winning
the Butlerian Jihad.
Yeah, winning a very difficult war in what became known as the Butlerian Jihad. And I did discover that the Butlerians were actually a house that existed during that period of time that led that jihad and tried to usurp power from the emperor. And out of that conflict, what we discover as well is now there's religion takes on its own interesting connotation. So what we've discovered, and I think this is just from individual conversations we've had with each other, is that there's a fusing of religion. The Orange Catholic Bible is basically the text that contains the existing religions of the time. The Fremen derive some form of inspiration from that book, but they also had their own teachings. So,
and remember, those teachings were seeded there by the Bene Gesserit long ago for the reasons that whenever they needed to abuse that knowledge, they could. And this apparently happens in many civilizations, many worlds. They seed religions there so that if they need it, they can either influence, or as in Jessica's and Paul's case, they use it to survive on Arrakis, where they wouldn't have been able to.
In the first movie, the new movie, the Mother Superior, after testing Paul, she's leaving and she tells Jessica that a path has been laid. Well, in the book, the Mother Superior, she cries because apparently she viewed Jessica as a daughter figure. And she says, for the son and mother, a path has been laid, but for the father, nothing. So she knows the plans that are unfolding. She knows that the Duke Leto Atreides is not going to survive. Now, what does that say about her? Well, what we know is that the Bene Gesserit, their plans are measured in thousands of years.
That's another good thing. They do show that in the prophecy show, is that they try to build loyalty to the group, to the Bene Gesserit first, right? So I can see that struggle.
Sisterhood above all.
Yeah, so there's that struggle in Jessica that comes way later on in the Dune books where she loves Leto, but she also knows she is supposed to be dedicated to the Bene Gesserit. So there's that conflict between, do you stick with your group or do you follow your love, your passion, your emotions?
Yeah.
And so, and I remember, I think I listened to this in a podcast where he was trying to make a dichotomy between, even if you have a perfectly laid plan, it does not factor in the possibilities,
the what ifs,
that come from emotion.
Yes.
There are emotional decisions, there are rational decisions.
So, funny enough, these are the unexpected elements of prescience that Paul is able to build in, where Aaliyah cannot. And in Children of Dune, Leto Atreides, Paul's son, he takes a completely different outlook on prescience. He doesn't want to know what's going to happen. So he wants it all to be random, because for him it's a surprise. And he said, what's the point in knowing everything? If you know everything, there's no spice of life. There's no surprise. There's no spontaneity.
It just becomes all bland, because you know what's coming, you know what's going to happen. There's nothing exciting that can happen to you. There's nothing that can happen that's different than you expected.
Well, yes, and I think that's the angle he's taking, but he also has examples to look at. His father, he's able to tap into prescience and tell what can happen in the future. But look what happened to him, right? He became a victim of that. Now, Aaliyah, his aunt, she becomes addicted to the spice and she becomes an abomination. He doesn't want that. So he chooses the golden path, the path that has not actually been taken. And back to what you were saying about the Jessica's loyalty to the Bene Gesserit, she has a rekindling of that relationship with the Bene Gesserit in Children of Dune. And this is also part of the plot line where Aaliyah becomes very concerned about the fact that Jessica is coming back to Arrakis to see her grandchildren, to see her daughter, to see what has become of the Imperium, to see what has become of the Fremen. And there is a concern that the Fremen are losing their ways. So the reason that they were such a formidable force, the reason why they were able to stand toe-to-toe with and indeed exceed the ferocity of the Sardaukar is because they lived in a harsh environment. So it forced them to adapt. And that adaptation...
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. When I was saying ideas I liked in his books, that's another one I forgot to mention.
The culture.
That the environment can produce this hardened individual.
Yeah.
The centuries and centuries and centuries of growing up in such a harsh condition forces you to be strong. You have no choice, otherwise you die out. And I thought that was very interesting. I like that idea. Go ahead.
So Stilgar, he notices that there's a watering down of the culture. So I did not intend this pun, but an example is the water discipline is something that both Paul noticed in Dune Messiah. It's something that comes up in the Dune Messiah book, that the water discipline of the people is starting to become lax. They don't revere and hold sacred water in the post-Muad'Dib times as they did in the pre-Muad'Dib times.
Like bring up, I know you've read the book in the movie, but whenever Paul cries after killing that Fremen, they mentioned something about how like meant something to them to see that he used water after defeating an enemy.
Yeah. So for them, they don't believe in losing your water for someone that has died. They see it as a waste of water, and that's representative of the Fremen culture during that period of time. But what we see in the preceding books, Dune Messiah, Children of Dune, is that there's a pacification, an acceptance that we don't have to live like this anymore. So why should we? And so water becomes more available, and the reason why is because the planet Arrakis is going through changes. So there's pools of water that are spawning. There's greenery that's coming back to desolate parts of what are known as bleds.
Remember, the planet was originally not a desert.
Right. Yeah.
It was basically terraformed into a desert so they could have worms.
Yeah, I don't remember how that all occurred, but it happened in like ancient times. So in any event, during the events of Paul Atreides, it's a completely desert planet, and in the preceding books, what we see is like, well, after the jihad, greenery starts coming back, water starts coming back, and there's a concern between Leto Atreides and Ganima, his twin sister, that the spice is disappearing. And why is the spice disappearing? Because the sand trout are disappearing, and the sand trout are what feed the worms, and it's part of this unseen ecosystem that exists that keeps the planet of Arrakis vibrant and the spice existing.
So it keeps the worms vibrant.
No, so the worms actually produce the spice.
Well,
by
what I'm
eating
saying
the
is,
sand trout, and they secrete the little makers that create the spice.
Yeah, and they sequester the water underground because the water is death basically to the worms.
Yes, it can be.
Yeah.
And so the concern, and this is what sets Leto and Ganima upon the Golden Path, the concern is that, well, if water comes back to Arrakis, it'll kill the worms, and it'll completely change the culture of the Fremen, and they'll lose their way. And now, I haven't really understood, because there's always this concern where previous generations, they had to sacrifice for other generations coming after them to have a better life. I think we were part of that generation where we had fellow citizens who, I remember reading stories about this. Why are you a police officer? Why do you serve in the government? And their logic, and these are I don't know if they believe this or not, but the things that were said was, well, I want to leave a better America for generations after me. And this motivated people. This was their purpose.
No, I believe it.
Yeah, I don't
People
know.
want better for their children.
Sure,
they do.
I'm not going to argue that point, but the people who are saying this, if they're in government, you kind of have to question the motives.
Oh yeah,
at least a little bit.
But they're appealing to a common belief.
Yes, which was shared, and I think yeah, and that's fair. I think the people who came before them, they were made of tougher stuff, and that's a direct correlation to what we see in the book. The sacrifices that have been made by harder Fremen of the desert, the Fedaykin, these are the death commandos. Their sacrifices are what paved the way for the vices and comforts of life that now exist on Arrakis post Paul Atreides. There's a legitimate concern where I'm at in the book, Children of Dune, that this watering down of the culture is going to negatively affect the culture. And one piece that ties into that directly is the Carrinos, House Carrino, which have typically been the emperors of the Imperium. They're plotting Theradon. He's the heir apparent to the throne. He's plotting his return to being emperor, but he's doing it slowly. So he's taking a long view of things, which is smart. That's what you have to do. And what he's doing is basically rebuilding his Sardaukar forces over time. He has been noticed saying is he wants to make sure that his are a match, if not exceed the Fremen in ferocity in battle. And he believes that they do. At this point, they just don't exist in large numbers yet. And one of his immediate lieutenants, Tychon, believes that he's actually adopted the religion of the Fremen. He's adopted the discipline of the old Fremen, and he has instilled that discipline within the Sardaukar. And what it has done is made them a more lethal force to deal with. And the reason that they do that is because they acknowledge that the Fremen of old, they tapped into something, and this is what you were saying, that hardiness about them that allowed them to survive in such harsh conditions, but now they can impose their will all over the Imperium because of that. And another piece of this is the religion, right? The religion gives them Northern Star to keep them in line, to keep them suffering, to keep them moving forward in hopes for better time. But that's ultimately the conundrum, right? Is Muad'Dib is a realization of all their waiting, all their suffering, all their hardship. And what comes with him is that acceptance. But what comes after that is what could be predicted as desolation. Because now they've suffered for so long, thousands of years, that they've succeeded. What comes next? Well,
yeah, that's always the issue.
Vulnerability
in religion,
being
is
soft.
There's always
losing your edge.
Yeah, I mean, I think many religions all anticipate an arrival of something, right? Mm-hmm. So, like you said, there isn't much thought of what happens after. They usually talk generally. Well, I guess we'll all live in peace. But up until that point, they're all really just waiting for, ooh, when's the end going to come? Well, I think I see a sign. Oh, I think someone's doing something that's going to bring it forth. Well, I got to preach in order to get enough people in the ark so that they make it, right? Nothing stays the same. Things are always in a point of change. You're just seeing them in between changes. Mm-hmm. There's no final state, right? And I think that is the more healthy way of looking at things. The idea that you can keep things static in one place, always the same. It's not possible.
And this is really the point that Paul is trying to understand. He's trying to understand how to square this issue, and he notices that religious government isn't the way. It's not the way forward, but it's also the way now. So if you take away people's individuality, what you have are mindless drones. So you're just going to have mindless drones. And if all you have is mindless drones, the people who are able to achieve a certain level of awareness are always going to be able to take over. And that's who Paul is. For better or for worse, that's who he is. But Paul also recognizes that could be anybody. Not him, not his family. Anybody could come in and claim to be Muad'Dib, claim to be the Lisan al-Gaib. And that's very frightening for him to accept. And so he struggles with trying to find a way to enlighten. And I think that's the right word. He's trying to find a way to enlighten the Fremen people to evolve while keeping their ways and not losing their edge. And it's a difficult needle to thread.
Yeah.
Because
change is inevitable.
Right.
But you want to respect the old ways as well.
Yes.
Because so how do we go forward retaining those two ideas?
Yeah. It's hard to thread that needle. And so what I see as the path forward is, and what he sees is the path of the preacher. So he's taking on this almost legendary figure, which people kind of assume to be Muad'Dib, but they can't prove it. And so he's taking on this role to remind them who they are, but also accept that the future is not guaranteed.
True.
And he notices this, and I may have already said this, but he notices this by little things, little changes in how people regard water discipline. Water discipline is something that comes up in the Dune Messiah, but also in Children of Dune. And it's something that each member of his family is noticing. First it's Paul, then it's Leto, and then it's Ganima, and then it's Jessica. And they're noticing these subtle breaking down of the discipline. And it's concerning to them because enemies are at the gate. We can see them, y'all can't. And now's not the time to be getting lax.
You're losing your edge. Well, let's wrap up Dune, but we will continue discussion on it another time. Alright, and there's another book I want to talk about. It's called 7 Greeks, translations by Guy Davenport. I really like this book. It goes over some writings of presocratics and songwriters, poets, myth makers, and it always gets my mind thinking the idea that someone can write something 2,000, 200, 400, 300 years ago and we still are able to read it today. I just think that's amazing. I think that's great. And I want to read a couple of things from Heraclitus and then maybe a little bit of Diogenes, and then we're just going to comment on it. So here's one. Men dig up and search through much earth to find gold. Now, ain't that true? What do you think about that?
Well, it's funny. The first thought that comes to mind is a quote from Zatoichi the Blind Swordsman that I remember and I wrote down. The fool sees the glint of money and throws all caution to the wind. How is that for parallelism?
To me, what it brings up is, for instance, there's so many authors that I don't like, but somehow, eventually, I found someone like Nietzsche, I found someone like Primo Levi, and I thought, wow, somehow, compared to all the other people I was reading, these people speak to me in a way, they have a voice in the way that they write that I find interesting, engaging, and keeps me reading. But there was lots of stuff I had to go through that I didn't like to get to it. And I think it's the same thing with anything that you enjoy. There's a lot of art that I've seen, and I don't like most of it, but there's some of it that I really, really like. And you have to sift through a lot of dirt to find that gold. And that's what it says to me. And I think it's still true.
I mean, yeah, I've told you offline that I feel that the way people really learn is by reading, not by listening, not by watching, by reading, because that interface gives you the opportunity to absorb what you're looking at, what you're intaking, and then think about it. And that process is invaluable. And I think that's what kind of this quote gets to, is that there's suffering and then there's enlightenment.
Yes, and you have to find that. So it's a lot of searching. Another one is...
You have to toil.
Yes. Toil the earth. Another one is, our understanding of the greatest matters will never be complete. And I have found this so true in my life. Let me tell you something. I see this pattern everywhere. You can go online right now. Is Trump a hero, a savior, or is he Hitler? You can find people who can lay it down, tell you precisely all the things he did wrong, how he's going to lead this country into a garbage can. And you can find someone else who says he's prophesied in the Old Testament. God sent him personally to America to save it. This goes through anything. Is Dune good? You can find people who say it's trash. People who make an argument that it's good. You can go into sciences. Is string theory correct? You can find someone who lays out all the reasons why it's correct, and then someone who trashes all those reasons. So
read the quote again.
Our understanding of the greatest matters will never be complete. And I think the big questions, the big things like who runs society, what's the greatest organization of society, what's the best way to live, what's love, what's the best intellectual pursuits. You're going to have a group of people on both sides of the issue fighting each other tooth and nail that they're right. And I have seen that to be true in my own life.
What I've seen and heard is that God works in mysterious ways.
Oh, hallelujah.
And I mean, but I think whether you believe that statement or not is, I would say, irrelevant. This reminds me of an experience I had where a teacher once said to me that what I'm teaching you right now, you're probably not going to understand. I'm going to help you get through it, but you're not going to understand it. Years later, 5, 10, 15, 20 years later, you may start to just begin to understand what I was trying to teach you. She was right. I mean, it was math, but she was right. Sometimes things click immediately, and sometimes they take time.
I've had that experience in my life.
Sure.
Sometimes you can't get it, and then someone explains it to you in a way that finally the gears click together and you go, oh, that's what all those people were trying to say. I had that experience in math. I never understood it. And I had one teacher in college who, for whatever reason, could explain it away, and it all was like, oh, that's what I'm doing. That's what doing this operation, this calculation. This is how it makes sense.
Yeah.
But for some reason, it never did before. It was just like, oh, learn this formula, and then just hope and pray you pick the right one on the quiz to plug the numbers into. But why are you doing it? What's the point of it? How does it make sense? I didn't understand the logic of it.
Our species doesn't, in most cases, we don't know how to learn.
No.
Learning how to learn is a skill. Understanding how you learn, what elements and tools you need to be moving forward, progressing in a particular topic area is not an area we really spend a lot of time on. This actually goes back to your quote, which is it's suffering. Through that process of trying, you will inevitably get to a place where you kind of understand, but maybe not completely, but at least you have some basics.
I agree. Here we go, another one. I mean, this is so true back then and now. Eyes are better informers than ears. I mean, come on, people. How many times have you heard chitta-chatta? But let me see it happen. Let me see you do it. Let me see what really is going on Earth, because y'all talking a lot.
I mean, I don't know.
How
is that going to apply to people who are like flat earthers? You can't see gravity, but they still believe the Earth is square. You can fall off of it. I mean,
Did you know recently somebody did a documentary where they paid for, I think it was like 3 or 4 famous YouTube flat earthers to go to Antarctica, and they all set up their cameras around a pole, because there's a certain time in the year where the sun never dips below the horizon. It actually stays, I think, for 3 or 6 months. It stays above the horizon, which isn't possible in Antarctica given the flat Earth map. It's not possible. So if that were to happen, it would be 100% proof. You know, it cannot be denied. That I just proved you wrong. You yourself recorded it. Your own equipment. You yourself were there. But guess what happened?
They rationalized. Like, well,
no, okay. They said, okay, you're right, but the guy, I was very proud of some of them. They said, listen, we were here. We saw it happen. What does it mean? Well, it means our models are a little off. It's still flat. We got to incorporate this into our models, right? But then, guess what the viewers saw? They faked it. It's CGI. None of this happened. It's like, oh my god. You know what I'm saying? You can't. There's certain people you just can't. Well, what can I give you? What can I give you? That's the. Unless. Who knows even this would happen, but unless you ship every one of them to the moon so they can turn around and look at the Earth, they're not going to believe it. Yeah. And even then they'll say, well, how do I know I'm on the moon? And how do I know this isn't a big screen? You know what I'm saying?
The questioning has a place, but it also has a time.
Yes. I mean, you have to. This is the thing. I have no problem being skeptical and setting a proof for yourself and saying, if I saw this, I don't know all the variables, I don't know everything, but if I saw this, it would convince me. And I think that if you were a honest flat earther, you would say to yourself, okay, they're going to the Antarctica, and I know these guys have been making flat earth material forever. They're not going to lie about this, right? And that sun does not dip below the horizon. Then I have to admit it wasn't true. You have to be willing to be proven wrong.
Well, there's something to be said for pragmatic skepticism. That's how I kind of view myself. We often have conversations about topics ranging from politics to foreign policy, and one of the things I often tell you is, provide more detail, provide more data, be more specific. And it's not because I'm trying to have a go at you. It's because I'm trying to get you to understand the way that you think about certain topics is biased. And we need to set our bias aside in order to look at a topic objectively. And kind of the part of the scientific method to an extent, but just like perhaps a small piece of it. And pragmatic skepticism draws upon that scientific method to say, okay, look, there's something going on here. We don't know exactly what it is, but let's get some ground truths. From those ground truths, we can build a foundation from which we can move forward and build upon knowledge, and then build upon more knowledge and get to a place of understanding.
But for me, I come at it as there's so much, especially on grand and deep topics, I cannot talk to these people directly. I cannot ask these people directly. I cannot film them secretly to know what's going on, right? All I can do is from a distance, with my own intelligence and hypothesizing, is say what would likely happen given these characters, given these situations, as best I can. Because I don't have direct knowledge. How can I prove? I can't. All I can say is this likely happened from what I see. Knowing that I can be wrong, but as far as I can see.
Well, if you leave room to be proven wrong, that's better than most Americans. I think what I generally see is people, they approach a topic from, they're willing to hear what you have to say, but they already come into the topic having a point of view, and religion would be one of those topics. People...
Listen, believe me.
I know.
I know.
You probably know the certain religious texts better than most. And when you present conflicting points of view to people who have a biased
then
point
they
of view,
become the sudden critical person. Suddenly they're like, well, who translated that?
Yeah.
Where'd that come from?
Yeah.
Who said that? How do you know?
So what's the next
Suddenly.
What's the next
okay, yeah,
one
let's go next one. This ties into what you're talking about, Dune.
Yeah.
Could you imagine that Dune quotes basically a topic that 2,400 years ago someone talked about? Well, let's see. Everything flows. Nothing remains. Everything moves. Nothing is still. Everything passes away. nothing lasts.
Yeah. There's some quotes similar to that, non-verbatim, in the opening to certain chapters where basically in Dune Messiah as well as Children of Dune, they accept that everything is in flux. Prescience can only get you so far. And you have to build in that flux into your model and move forward with it. Because to not accept the unexpected is to be a victim of it. And certain mature preborn accept that as a reality, and others don't want to accept it as a reality. They end up being swept away by its consequences, by its existence.
Here's another one. We could put this in Dune as well. I think Frank Herbert might have read this.
He maybe did.
War is the father of us all and our king. War discloses who is godlike and who is but a man, who is a slave and who is a free man. What, a freeman?
I actually read a quote very similar to that in it may have been Messiah, but that's also a point that Paul mentions in Dune, which is he doesn't want war, but he also recognizes that war is inevitable. He can't stop it. So he recognizes that in order for the Fremen to be free, they have to make war to make their presence felt within the galaxy. And in order to do that, he understands he has to let it play out. And then he has to deal with the consequences of it afterwards.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
What else you got?
Hide our ignorance as we will. An evening of wine reveals it.
I mean, people's inhibitions are basically lowered when they've imbibed. That could go back to Dune as well. People who utilize the spice to escape their reality end up sharing versions of themselves that they otherwise would not. They let their walls down. This is certainly true for Aaliyah, but I think in her case, what she ends up doing is letting the walls down inside of her own mind that allows the wolves to enter the house. And the house in this case would be the Duke Harkonnen, which is interesting to think about because how could the Duke Harkonnen exist in her mind? Is his essence real in some way, or is he a manifestation of her own thoughts? And if it's one or the other, how could that end up with her possession? But perhaps there's more to it than that. It's just not explained. What other quote you got?
I like this one. I've dealt with this my whole life. Bigotry is the disease of the religious.
Oh man, that's
oh my god.
That's kind of oh man. A lot of people aren't going to like that quote, but I think that there's some truth to it. I don't think it can be denied. People who are going to probably hear this and think, "No, you're wrong."
I don't have bigotry.
I mean, listen. There's certainly ways to be religious without being a bigot.
Yes,
but I don't think it's practiced far and wide. I think it exists in small sects of certain religions.
I don't know. I think
certain religions.
It tempts that kind of behavior. I think as you become religious, the more religious you are, the more there's an in-group and an out-group. Yeah. There's a us and a them.
There's
a good and a bad.
Yeah.
Right? And so what does that do? Well, of course you're going to become bigoted.
More resistant to outside ideas that challenge your worldview, your religion, and you will become aggressive and combative with those new ideas.
Here's one of the best ones. Talk about 3 words being so true. I think there's few things we can find in life that are true. There are truths, but I just think they're few and hard to find. This one is true. Character is fate. Who you are basically predetermines your life.
Let's apply those 3 words to people we know. So I'm gonna throw out some names, and I want you to respond with the first thoughts that come to mind. President Donald J. Trump.
He, unbeknownst to him, and even unbeknownst to America, he had built up the type of person he would be that would make him win. I remember in interviews he's saying that what he was proud of his father, what he really took from his father, was his work ethic, that he never really took days off. He was working hard all the time, every day, That was his passion. That was his joy. Obviously, that made an imprint on him. Another thing, TV. His interest in TV, making one of the best TV shows of, was it 2000s? What was the name of the show?
It's called The Apprentice?
The Apprentice? Yes, I think they did like a ridiculous 9-10 seasons.
I never even saw it.
I never really watched it either, but I know it was a super hit. People loved it.
It's just because he said, you're fine.
That was a big highlight of it. Yeah.
There's a lot of that going on right now.
And the thing is, to be willing to do all those things, he had to naturally have those inclinations, those interests, right? To make it as far as he did. And all those things bundled up,
Taken together.
I mean, you can call him a clown, you can call him an idiot, you can call him a fool, but he beat every other Republican person running multiple times. He defeated many lawsuits, bad press.
And he ran for president 3 times.
Yes.
3 times.
And won twice.
Or 3 times, depending on who you ask.
I mean, true. You guys think I lost? Hell no.
And he's gonna run for a 4th term, apparently.
That's another part of his personality, which is I can win.
All right, now I got another name for you.
Yeah.
Elon Musk.
When you have Down syndrome and you're a little goofy and wonky and a drug addict, sometimes that can work out for you. Oh yes, and an absent father, someone who likes lying about themselves, somebody with grandiose visions of themselves. It can all bundle together, and you could become the head of Doge.
All right.
Powerful.
Powerful
stuff.
What about Bernie Sanders?
I don't know about. I think that from what I've seen with him, he's good at rallying people. I don't know much about him. I always thought he looked kind of like a SNL character, you know, this grumpy old man yelling at the TV about stuff that even his own side, they spoke to it, but they never wanted to implement. Like he would say like, healthcare for all, and they'd be like, that's probably a good idea. We're not gonna let you win. We're not gonna implement it, but yeah, your own side will not support you.
All right. What about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez?
She was a bartender, and that's good.
You have no character is fate. Go.
You know more about her than I do. Listen, I've seen very minimal clips. I find her annoying. I don't see the appeal, but obviously I would never say that she has no appeal because a lot of people like her. Yeah. So obviously a lot of people see in her something that I don't see. People think she's interesting. I don't think she's interesting. I don't really get it, but whatever it is she has, you tell me. I don't know.
Well, okay, just going along with the theme of character is fate. I think her appeal comes from there's a racial identity. She, much like myself, has a multiracial background. She's Hispanic, she's European, she's African, and she's Native American. Look, I'm the exact same. I think she cares about the people who elected her, and she takes that responsibility very seriously. But I also believe that she's not a leader in the sense that she can help people grow to appreciate the country that they live in and the values and freedoms that they have. Constantly saying we need more, we need money, you know, it's a good line, but
Hey, yo, cash money.
you know, instead of expecting businesses and government to give you money, perhaps empower your people that elected you, your constituents, to find ways to create money, not ask for it. Go work for it. What I have found, which I'm certain she has found, is that in order to obtain more money, you can't depend on one job. You can't depend on one source of income. You can't be tied to one organization for the rest of your life. You have to grow as an individual. You have to grow as a professional. You have to be willing to sacrifice. And that sacrifice will inevitably translate into additional opportunities to build your wealth. And now, there's an argument here that I understand is going to undermine my argument. Not everybody can do that. Well, okay.
What I've heard, which I like to put this way, is you have to build up skill and then put yourself in positions where you can be lucky.
Sure.
Luck only will happen to you a few times in your life. You just have to put yourself in the way of it.
Yeah.
Basically.
So I had a coach in high school who said something very similar to that. How he phrased it was, hard work and skill begets luck. If you put in the hard work, you develop the skill, luck will find you.
Well, the way I think of it, if you have the work and the skill, but you don't go anywhere where that's useful, you don't associate it with anything where that's useful, then the chances of luck hitting you are low.
Right.
But if you put yourself in the way of luck, right, you have a high. It's not a guarantee, but you have a higher chance of it hitting you.
But
right?
Isn't it interesting that I think AOC, she embodies this.
Oh, absolutely.
Like I believe she's very passionate about what she believes. I believe also, consequently, I believe she's very naive about certain things that she believes. Domestic policy, foreign policy in particular. But she embodies this persona of having the work ethic and the charisma and taking advantage of opportunities that manifest.
Yeah, they come her way. She saw the opportunity and she jumped at it.
She unseated a politician who had been in his seat for decades. And she rallied the people around her and got their confidence to go and win, and she won. So that is character fate for her.
I would say, I don't know enough about her, but I would say probably.
At this point, yes. I think, so that's the positive side to it. That's the upside. The downside is, and I'm waiting for this to happen, I believe, the downside of her character being her fate is that she moves too far to the left of the political spectrum, really far, and loses sight of the fact that she is there because the people elected her to be there.
Instead of staying center left and at least appealing to a vast majority of people,
right,
she could keep going down the path where she's so extreme that nobody likes her anymore. And
there's
isolates herself.
Yeah, there's a point of no return, and the pendulum swings both ways. I think she's definitely positions herself to be a person of the working man. I mean, she was a bartender. How can anybody who's been to a bar, which is like everybody in America, can appreciate the fact that she had to work her ass off to just get a paycheck, just be paid, and then she had to work her ass off to get into Congress. So I don't think anybody questions that. But one of the questions that she asked her constituents after Donald Trump won the presidency was, why did you vote for him? It was a very interesting inflection point. The question she asked was, why did you vote for him and me? And the responses she got was, well, he's kind of for the working man, and so are you. He's a populist, you're a left populist. That's one of the ones that stands out.
All right, let's go to the next one. I like this one. The best of men see only one thing worth having: undying fame. They prefer fame to wealth. The majority of men graze like cattle. I like that because it just shows you the mentality of the Greeks. I want to be a hero. I want to go down in the history books. That's what's valuable. And I like the disdain at the end. The majority of men graze like cattle. And it's actually true. The vast majority of people will be completely forgotten, and nobody will remember them.
But I think that statement also implies that the people who help the individual become famous become fat off of their victory. Off their success.
Yeah. Alright, I want to read some of Diogenes. I mean, the guy... Diogenes is, I think, is one of the most funny ones. And I think, well, this is the first quote they have here, is Diogenes is watching all these philosophers fight with each other about their different philosophies, and he comes in there and pees on them. All right, this why I like the attitude. He's like, "Oh, okay, you want to play this philosophy game? I'll show you." And one of those ones here, which is basically him explaining what he's doing, is, "I have come to debase the coinage." Right? So everybody's working in this philosophy coinage.
Debase the coin.
I come to debase
That,
the coinage.
the way I take that is, so the dollar. We don't think of this, right? It's a currency that we use to exchange and purchase goods, whatever. But the value that exists in that currency is what we place in it. So to me, what he's saying is like, currency's worthless.
By joining in, I think it's kind of like everything's walking around prestigious. Like, back away, child. We're talking about advanced things, and then he comes in and says, "Oh yeah, I'll show you. You think you're all high and fluting and all this stuff? I'll show you. I'll beat you at your own game." And I kind of like that.
Yeah.
Here's another one I like. This thing. He has a way of turning everything. Okay. Now imagine this. He's talking to the rich. Greek Roman times, they have slaves and all that
aristocracy.
Stuff. Yeah. It is absurd to bring back a runaway slave. If a slave can survive without a master, is it not awful to admit that the master cannot live without the slave? Oh, burn.
I mean, and honestly, that's the paradox of slavery in itself, is that it's not the slave that needs the master. No. It's the other way around.
And isn't it demeaning to have to admit that?
Yeah.
So you gotta let him go.
Yeah. I mean, well,
Right? I like that. See, he's always poking at them. That's what I like about him. Here's another one. Obviously, he's probably talking about himself.
Hang on a second.
What?
Do you think that same logic was used in the American Civil War, in the lead up to the American Civil War, where abolitionists were basically saying to Southerners, like, you're engaging in an evil. You claim to be Christians, and yet you're enslaving people.
Well, I think it's a burn given the society you're in, right? So the Greeks were very prideful about being Greek. Everyone else is a barbarian.
Right.
We're the educated. We're the top of society, right? So he's poking at them. How do you hurt someone like that? Well, guess what?
Their pride.
Exactly.
They attack their pride.
Aren't you so weak that you need your slave back? Wait a minute. Doesn't your slave need you, or do you need him? Right? And I think the Christians at the time, as far as I know, there was Quakers and Unitarians and stuff. And their angle is, we're all children of God. We're all sons of Adam. How can you enslave another child of God? I think that was their angle. I doubt they brought up Diogenes, who probably has probably more than in this book, probably said a lot of offensive things.
Yeah, but see, the attitude from Southern slave owners was that the slaves that we keep are our property.
Yeah.
And they are inferior to us.
Yeah, I believe that.
There was a lot of superiority of race that continued.
But I think in a religious
practice
context.
Of slavery. Yeah, of course, in the religious context. Yeah. And they believe that, this is actually God's will, that we enslave these people. But I'm trying to find, there has to be something that cuts through that, something that makes them realize that perhaps they're the inferior ones. And I think
An example that comes to mind is when they realized slaves could learn to read, and then they could read the Bible, and then they became religious, and then they started questioning their masters using the Bible against them. And that's that moment when the slave owners realized, oh, you guys can't read anymore.
Well,
I remember there being situations like that.
Yeah, well, because I think it brings humanity to them. Once someone can speak your language at the same level, suddenly you start identifying with them.
Yeah.
Right?
Now, how could you see them as a slave if they believe in God?
And especially, like you're saying, if you're both reading the Bible together, and it's saying stuff like you're creating God's image, and you're going to turn to your slave and go, hey, go do something, you're like, dang, something don't sit right. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So let's move on. I like this one. Obviously, still, I think this is Diogenes talking about himself. Of what use is a philosopher who doesn't hurt anybody's feelings? Man, we need that for today. Yeah. If only Diogenes was alive today and posting today. That's what we need.
Do you think who would you say is a modern day version of Diogenes? Because it seems like what he's doing is kind of a little bit of trolling, a little bit of provoking thought.
I don't know. This is the thing. In our times, unfortunately, and I think it really hurts our society, is that we have forsaken philosophers. We are a society that acts that we don't need them. We're not interested in what they say.
See, philosophers for me, they're kind of like synonymous with government regulation during a Republican administration. These are people that exist, but there's no private sector profession for them to exist in outside of academia.
Well, yes, for Greek times, right? The aristocracy would seek out the philosophical person. Basically...
Well, the political class, too.
Yeah, yeah.
Insight.
Yeah.
But nobody does that now.
But it's not like they had another job.
I mean,
these people would be patrons to them. Like there are patrons to artists.
So Republicans, they tend to turn to religious leaders who are considered to be philosophers. Remember George W. Bush? He wanted to talk to the Pope about the invasion of Iraq or something to that.
This is the thing. We still turn to religious people, but I don't consider religious people philosophers.
But a religious person could be a philosopher.
Yes, but still...
They're kind of cutting that line
okay,
thin, though.
That's the most they can allow a philosopher is if he's a religious philosopher. You get what I'm saying? The only way they're interested in a philosopher is if he's also religious.
Well, Kevin Bacon, and there's also that German Martin Luther.
What about him?
He was a philosopher because he was challenged. I think at some point you can be a religious figure, but you have to be a philosopher in order to articulate your arguments in a manner that will be accepted and challenging and provocative.
I agree with you. You can be a religious philosopher. What I'm saying is our culture is only interested in a philosopher if they're a religious philosopher. There are different types of philosophies, different types of people coming at different angles in philosophy, but they're not interested in anybody unless they're also a Christian philosopher, a Jewish philosopher.
Yeah, I mean, generally I would say that's true, but I think you're also generalizing the population. Like, we've seen statistics that most of them, like Americans, are becoming less religious and more agnostic. And I don't think those numbers are false in that it's not happening. We can question the quantity of those studies in terms of how many Americans are becoming agnostic and how quickly that's happening. I think that's fair game to be questioned. There are groups that exist, like secular humanism groups or secular humanists, that I think philosophers would actually nestle in nicely with groups like that, and they could share their thoughts in a manner that would be considered acceptable.
People, like for me, I seek out philosophy. That's how I know it, defined it. I seek out Sadler's channel. I seek out Nietzsche podcast. I seek out Entitled Opinions.
Mm-hmm.
So I am listening to philosophers. But in general, people don't give a shit what they say. They're not interested. Like, have you ever heard of Slavoj Žižek? Anyway, he's written, I think, like 30 plus books. He takes the tour on many shows.
So he exists in Europe.
Yeah, but he has
different.
penetration in here. He has penetration here. He's done talks in America too.
Yeah, but it's like you said, it's different in America. In Europe, there's a work culture that exists, but if you ever go to places like France, they consider lunchtime to be sacrosanct. It's a different work culture there, and I think that speaks to the ability for philosophers to come in and provide additional morality, additional, what would we call it, the joie de vivre, something else to live for besides work. Or the joy of living is what joie de vivre means, and that doesn't exist in America. I think what exists in America is you work, and then you die.
That's good.
I mean, this is how God intended it, right?
All right, let's go to the next one.
Yeah.
I like this one. Come on. Think about this, man.
I need to hear it first.
Well, use your telekinesis, for Christ's sake. Okay.
I'm going to move this mic and hit you in the head.
To be saved from folly, you need either kind friends or fierce enemies.
So this goes back to what we were talking about earlier with Elon. It's like people, when you surround yourself with yes men, what you end up with is yes men. If nobody's telling you you're acting foolish, if nobody's checking your idiocy or checking your ignorance, then you're going to continue to act like an idiot, and you're going to continue to look ignorant. And I think it's kind of sad to not have that perspective. And I honestly, if you ever make it to his level of celebrity and fame and dollars in terms of what's in your bank account, and you don't have people around you who know you very well, you know, obviously besides like your mom and perhaps your brother, because that's a little bit different. That's family. But I mean, friends who can kind of level with you on a completely different level.
But what about the other side of it? He says also a fierce enemy. You don't want to fumble in front of them. You don't want to make them look good. You don't want to be their dupe. Right?
Well,
so you avoid making certain mistakes.
Well, if
in competition with somebody.
That's different because competition is different. Business
well, what I'm
is
saying is he's saying both. He says, to be saved from folly, you need either a kind friend or a fierce enemy.
In the vein of business, you want to have people you can trust around you who are in your court, who are on your side, and not having those people around you. I'd say it's very similar to not having personal friends around you whom you can trust and kind of rein you in when you're kind of acting out. Mike Tyson, he had to go on tour. He had the Mike Tyson talks.
Yeah, I remember those.
That?
Yeah.
The reason he was doing those talks is because he owed the IRS like millions of dollars.
I remember that, yeah.
And he would be acting a fool on stage.
Have you listened to
I've
listened to his
heard
podcast? Yeah, I actually think he's really good.
Yeah, when he's not high.
Well, I mean,
He's always high.
Yeah.
So when he was on stage, though, his now wife was talking to him, telling him, cut the shit, rein it in, and that's when he realized, like, oh shit, I need to maintain a certain air of professionalism here, or I need to not allow my guard down or my walls down. I need to pull it together. And so he has somebody there kind of helping him. That's a little bit different because she straddles the personal as well as the professional.
but I think this he's able to do that because he comes from boxing and he had a coach, which means he can take instruction. Someone can tell him, hey, you can do this better, you can stop doing this,
All right.
and he can absorb it and do it.
Yeah.
And I think that ability was instilled in him from practicing and being taught and trained by his coach. I think that's a really good ability to have, because there's certain people who you can tell them stuff that they don't listen. Yeah. So it's like,
For now.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let me go to the next one. I like this one because, again, I think he's talking about himself, but it's funny because sometimes it's just the way I think, right? So, and this isn't normally how, like, happy is the man who does X. This isn't how they write it, right? So, happy the man who thinks to marry and changes his mind, who plans a voyage he does not take, who runs for office but withdraws, who wants to belong to the circle of the influential man but is excluded. Oh, man.
I'm trying to think of somebody who comes to mind with that. I know there's Trump actually qualifies. Trump, he wanted in. He wanted a seat at the table, but everyone was saying, no, get out of here. We don't want you here. He had to beat them for them to start listening, and then to start going to him.
Well, but to me, he's looking at the end state. It's like, okay, you're gonna go get married, but what happens when you're actually married? You're gonna go over and take this voyage, but think about the times he took writing it.
Yeah.
You could be killed. Your boat could sink. It could be horrible, right?
Yeah.
Let's say you go for office, but do you want to be that guy that's in office? They're corrupt. They're scum. They're bad, right? So he's going through all these things. In my mind, it's like, you do all this stuff to get it, but are you really happy that you got it?
Oh, I mean, well, that isn't that
The Buddhism?
teaching? Yeah, it's basically, you seek something and then you achieve it and then you're not satisfied, and then you seek the next thing, you achieve it and then you're not satisfied, and then on and on and on it goes until, who knows? I know people who they seek one challenge, they achieve it, and then they're like, what's next?
Dude, these two right here, I don't know if it's Diogenes, maybe it's a misprint, maybe it's AOC, but I still think they hit.
AOC.
Maybe she got in there somehow. I don't know how she squeezed these in here. I'm gonna read these two. In the rich man's house, there is no place to spit but in his face. Dang. And the next one, the luxurious have made fragility and affliction. Ooh, did a Freeman write that? Who wrote that?
Now, the first one, I definitely feel like there are people who exist in our society who believe no man should have that much wealth. No man should have that much land. No man should own that much property. And to those people, I say, you're entitled to your opinion, but that's not going to change anything.
And I love, the thing is too, we were talking about the Fremen, that they were getting it too good and they were losing their ways. The luxurious have made fragility and affliction, meaning they are afflicted with weakness. Their luxurious lives have made them frail.
So that is the general concern that exists at the stage of the book I'm in Children of Dune, where a schism is happening and a civil war is about to erupt. And the reason that it's erupting is because there's a faction that believe the culture is heading in a negative direction. And there's another group who believes that they should be in control of everything. And then there's another group that's just caught in between.
Proof. Here's another one. And again, did Kanye West steal my book and write this in here? I'm turning the invitation down. The last time I was there, they were not thankful enough that I came. Dang, dude. Y'all ain't happy enough I'm here. Next time I ain't even coming.
That's definitely the height of arrogance to feel that way. I think that is the way Kanye feels at times. He's like, y'all should just be grateful that I'm here. You should be lucky to be in my presence. Peasants.
Oh my god, these people from the distant path dropping the nuggets of gold that we are digging up here.
Okay.
Listen to this. Masters should obey their slaves. Patients, their doctors. Rivers, their banks.
I don't get the last part. Rivers, their banks. Rivers, their banks. Because they're saying like money flows from them. Who is they? The people who use the bank?
Well, in my interpretation of this is the river is the master, the river is the doctor. And they have to obey
the flow?
The surrounding topography, which would be the people. So in the master's case, all of his slaves. In the doctor's case, all of his patients. So there's an interaction between, like you were saying, with the Muad'Dib and his jihad.
There's a
in a sense,
there's a symbiosis there.
He's the river, but what is controlling the river? It's flowing through.
The movement. The movement is the river, and he's just going with the flow.
Yeah, but he can't go anywhere he wants.
Mm-hmm.
He has to follow the turns and twists and dips of the land.
Yeah, just like anybody else. The only difference is he can be at the head, or he can be in the middle, or at the behind. But unfortunately for him, if he's in the middle, or anywhere else except the front, he died. He did.
I like this one because it's also mentioned by Nietzsche. He says, even with a lamp in broad daylight, I cannot find an honest man. Ooh. Holy shit. Wow.
What do you think, how do you consider that phrase in a capitalist economic system? Do you think it's more true or less true, or doesn't matter?
Rephrase it.
Apply that phrase to capitalist economic system.
Well, the way I look at the phrase is, and you have to think back to his time, right? Who is he talking to? He's not talking to everybody. There's probably political, religious, military, those with influence and money. Those who he's talking to. And those type of people, like Elon, have yes men around them. And they never have to be truthful. Nobody forces them to be truthful.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could just imagine him trying to have deep conversations with someone who has all the pride in themselves. They think about my family name. I'm this great person. I've been born into this wealthy family. And for him to say, well, you need to be critical of this, or how can we think about this, and then not being able to see it. Or talking around what he says or under it, but not giving him a direct answer. I can see in that frustration saying, where can I just talk to someone who will be honest with me? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So in Dune, and it's funny you bring that up, because in Dune, there's this moment where, as the preacher, Paul, is basically telling people that suffering is growth. He's telling them some truths that they don't want to hear. And this goes back to what you said about luxury having a knock-on effect. Luxury, the too much luxury can have an effect. And what he's basically trying to remind people of is that's right. Too much luxury can have an effect, and we will suffer for it.
True. I like this one too. It's like a spirit animal or my avatar or something. You know, when I read these kind of things, I'm like, man, me and him could have hung out. We could have joked and joshed together. It would have been good times. He says, if, as they say, I am only an ignorant man trying to be a philosopher, then that may be what a philosopher is. You can't do this with Dodge. And he comes back with the guns.
What he's saying is basically what Marcus Aurelius has said, which is humility in some ways is a path to wisdom. But you can only achieve wisdom if you accept your failings.
True. That's very true. Okay, we're ending with this one because we've gone too long.
Yeah.
But I like this one. I was reading Nietzsche not too long ago, and he was talking about how philosophy is a medicine, right? People become philosophical out of suffering. If you're just living your regular life and things are going well and either okay or happy, nothing forces you to say, wait a minute, what's going on? You start thinking critically. You start thinking like, why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to society in general? You start becoming critical. It knocks you out of your happy-go-lucky, regular patterns of life. And let me read this one here. Why not whip the teacher when the pupil misbehaves? Oh my God.
Now, when you think about what's going on in the economy right now with the purges in the federal government, do you think that the people who are being let go should whip their employers? And how would they do that?
Listen, something should be done, but can it be done? Is it practical? Right? Those are two different things, okay?
Yeah.
But in my mind, I wish there was a law like this. I wish there was something where, I mean, and this does ultimately happen in like businesses and stuff, right? If a business starts acting very poorly and it's going bad, right? Eventually management will be held accountable, right? Just like when Elon went into Twitter and just fired everybody, right? And when they went over the sheets, they showed like how much money they were wasting on all these things. And I talked to you about it a little bit, and it's like eventually, you know, usually it's just the peons that get, you know, fired, written up, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But if things continue to go bad and worsen, eventually that target gets put on management, and they say, no, it's not the people under management. Management is messed up.
So you're saying it's the management bureaucracy that should be.
Well, I wish it happened more often.
What happened more often?
That the finger pointing and the anger and disdain Instead of going to the people, it should be the people managing the people.
But you realize that there's no mechanism that
I know.
exists for people.
That's what I told you.
I mean, there's surveys
It might be true,
and things like that, but how often are
But
they
how do you
read?
implement it? It may not be implementable, but I think that's how it should be. It should be more in that direction.
So,
But I don't think there's any way to make it that way. Because who makes the rules? The people or the people over the people, right? You have to think that it's fairly unlikely that there's going to be a group of people with power who makes rules against themselves. Usually that only happens over time, after riots, after societal breakdowns. Then rules are implemented on. I watched the great podcast, The Rest is History, and they went over the French Revolution. And at first, the royalty were very flippant. No, we gonna do what we gonna do. No, y'all gonna obey. But eventually, when the people rioted and busted into their palaces and round them all up, suddenly, they're like, wait a minute, you know what? We can work with you. You know what? There should be laws against me. I shouldn't have all this power. You're right. Right? So that stuff doesn't just happen. It gets forced upon them.
So, okay, bring it back to modern times. Because I think there's a perfect example in the layoffs that are going on in the federal government right now. Now, set aside your personal opinion. How do you think that these layoffs should be allowed to occur? And if not, why not? Or
Yes.
do you think that they should be able to occur?
Okay, like I said, we won't know until the end of the year if this is true. But let's say I had power, right? And I went into government. This would never happen because it'd be a disaster. But I think that our debt spending is going to be one of the things that could trigger a decline in this country. And I think the fact that we just spend and if you look, is what's important too is look at a chart of our spending for the past 150 years. And you'll see the past 30 years, it has gone insane. We spend like drunken sailors, okay?
Well,
And the thing is, our currency, the dollar, right now, is the world's currency. People invest in us, they will accept our dollar. But with the Chinese building their Silk Road, and them getting in partnerships with Iran and Russia, it will not always be the case. And one day, because of our flagrant spending and thinking that nothing will happen to us and we're just going to boss everybody around, one day the world will change. And suddenly, it's going to be, like I said before, like Looper, where in the future, China is the wealthy country. China is where all innovation is coming from. And Americans are going to be a bunch of bums pushing their shopping carts with their folded up cardboard home. We're going to be making cheap goods for China. That's what's going to happen.
but at least we won't have to pay rent if we have a cardboard.
There are always bright outlines around the dark cloud of despair.
Which party do you think is most responsible for financial mismanagement?
Well, the thing is, this is how I see it. We never spend less. Okay? It's what we're spending it on. So Republicans come in and they say military,
Yeah.
world domination, we're spending there.
Yeah.
Democrats come in, they don't really cut the military, but they say, you know what, we need to focus on SNAP, and we need to give out food benefits, and we need to help people with their rent, and we need to do stuff like that, right? So spending always increases, but it pushes out in different directions depending on who has power. But nobody says, which I would say if I had power, and I would get kicked out and probably killed for this, but I would say, no. Spending capped. For the next 4 years, we're cutting 10% of everything. Everything's 10% a year. And we're going to look in, and then I have someone like Elon, but someone more with the ability, not some coked up, multiple job baby daddy guy. I would have somebody who is super nerd, who's really into finances and numbers, and I would say him cut anything that even looks like it's wasteful. I don't give a shit. We'll fix it later. Just keep cutting. Every day I want a stack of things that you cut on this table, and I just want I want everyone to hate me, and I want them to all cry, and I want them to all get on TV and say he's ruining the world, and that's all I would be doing.
Okay, we talked about this before. offline, but help me understand, why is it you personally, knowing that the debt crisis or the debt doesn't impact you directly and probably never will? Why?
We don't know. Maybe.
No, okay, but go along with the logic.
Yeah.
Why is it that you care so much about this particular topic?
This is the thing, is that, for one, okay, I like debates and stuff, right? So that's one thing. My mind, I like fighting people about stuff as far as debates go, okay? So I am prone to do that. But the thing is, the government will come to you and say, you know what? You need to be responsible. You need to have health care. You need to have savings. You need to have a 401k. You need to spend within your budget. Don't max out credit cards. These are all bad things. Meanwhile, they are maxing out every credit card they have. And then when I mean credit card, I mean they're maxing out their China card.
I'm talking about you, though. You know, you say you need to have a... Who says that you need to have... I'm the one to tell you need to have a 401k. The government's not coming to you saying...
You've never heard anyone in government say that?
No. We have...
I remember Obama talking about it.
He may have encouraged it, but it doesn't mean that it needed to happen. That's different from saying it. You have to have it versus you should have it.
But after Democrats and Republicans committed to fiscal discipline during the 1990s, we lost our way in the decade that followed. We increased spending dramatically for 2 wars and an expensive prescription drug program. But we didn't pay for any of this new spending. Instead, we made the problem worse with trillions of dollars in unpaid-for tax cuts. Tax cuts that went to every millionaire and billionaire in the country. Tax cuts that will force us to borrow an average of $500 billion every year over the next decade. We have to live within our means. We have to reduce our deficit, and we have to get back on a path that will allow us to pay down our debt. Some of you might be wondering, why is this so important? Why does this matter to me? Well, here's why. Even after our economy recovers, our government will still be on track to spend more money than it takes in throughout this decade and beyond. That means we'll have to keep borrowing more from countries like China. That means more of your tax dollars each year will go towards paying off the interest on all the loans that we keep taking out. By the end of this decade, the interest that we owe on our debt could rise to nearly $1 trillion. Think about that. That's the interest, just the interest payments. Then, as the baby boomers start to retire in greater numbers and healthcare costs continue to rise, the situation will get even worse. By 2025, the amount of taxes we currently pay will only be enough to finance our healthcare programs, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and the interest we owe on our debt. That's it. Every other national priority, education, transportation, even our national security, will have to be paid for with borrowed money. Now, ultimately, all this rising debt will cost us jobs and damage our economy. It will prevent us from making the investments we need to win the future. We won't be able to afford good schools, new research, or the repair of roads. All the things that create new jobs and businesses here in America. Businesses will be less likely to invest and open shop in a country that seems unwilling or unable to balance its books. And if our creditors start worrying that we may be unable to pay back our debts, that could drive up interest rates for everybody who borrows money, making it harder for businesses to expand and hire or families to take out a mortgage.
How can someone say, you need to do all these things to be fiscally responsible? Meanwhile, I am spending like an idiot on everything, anything, printing money, I don't give a shit. Okay, fine, let's just say what you're saying is true, whatever, but I don't need to hear it from you. It's like an obese person telling me that I need to exercise. Okay, fine, it's probably true, but I'm not going to believe it from you. So,
I still don't understand why this topic.
I care about war and our debt. That's what I care about. And obviously freedom. Those are three things.
Well, freedom, I can get along with that. There's obviously a difference in early on administrations versus prior administrations, and I think that there's obviously a difference in terms of how one party viewed freedom of speech versus vice another. So that one I can get with you on. But when it comes to the debt, I mean,
have you ever researched or looked into the many times Argentina's government has collapsed due to their spending? The many times Greece has collapsed due to their spending.
So you're saying it could happen here?
That's what I'm saying. We are so prideful and arrogant. We say it cannot happen
But it's never
here.
happened.
I know, until it does.
Well,
and we
I
have to
mean,
remember too
the
that
pandemic,
our country is only 250 years
Nobody
old.
thought that the pandemic would ever happen too.
Exactly.
Like Contagion was a movie with Matt Damon, and I remember watching that movie in in college, and thinking to myself, man, that would suck if this happened. And,
Until it does.
Come around,
That's the thing.
Coronavirus came around.
And I watched a thing, I remember, it was a long time ago now, but about what happened to the Roman Empire as far as,
Well, spending
because
had a
there's
lot
many,
to do with it.
there's many
But it
theories
wasn't
about
just that.
what contributed to its collapse. And one of them is definitely its spending. And how it debased its coinage, as Diogenes said,
Yeah.
is that they started out with pure silver coins, pure gold coins, but over time, to pay their military, they didn't have the money.
See,
So they had to put copper into their gold coins.
for the Roman Empire, it's a number of factors. It was outside external pressures as well as this thinking that we must expand to protect ourselves, as well as the debt, as well as printing money, and not being able to feed the population that existed within the borders and boundaries of your empire.
I mean, once
That's why it had to break up.
once
There was a Western
your money
empire, and
collapses,
then there was a Western and an Eastern empire.
yeah. But what I'm saying is, like, once your money collapses, once your debt gets unbearable, like they said, I think it's $1 trillion. We spend more on our debt every year, more than our military spending. Okay, and this is the thing. We will eventually pay for all that we've done.
Okay.
I don't know when it's going to happen.
What would that look
And
like?
it may not affect me.
What would that
and it may
look
not
like?
affect you. But
Tell me
one
what
day,
you
if we
think.
keep on this path,
imagine a future state that you keep talking about,
yeah,
where the spending cocks come home to roost.
yeah.
Okay. What would that look like?
We will stagnate. We will become a second or third world country. But this will happen. They'll have moon bases. They'll have Mars bases. Kind of like at India, where they send a satellite up and we're just like, ooh, good job, you finally did it, right? Or Iran wants to build a nuclear plant, and we're like, oh no, you can't do that, right? So we have other countries either looking down on our country or telling us, no, you can't do that, right? That's what we do to other countries now. That's what other countries will do to us. Should we give America a loan? I don't know, man. Are they good for it? I don't know. Should our investors invest in their stock market? I don't know. It has a high chance of collapsing. Maybe we'll invest at 20% interest.
But, okay, but there's no indicators of what you're saying besides your own personal opinion. If you look at stock indexes and venture capitalist investment and the stock market in general as an example, there's, the stock market's doing pretty good. Unemployment is pretty high, on par. I mean, at least for now, until the new numbers come out, because, like 250,000 plus employees, we're expecting to flood the unemployment insurance market. Well, that's probably going to have an impact. And then you have, of course, the economy's doing pretty good. So the indicators that you're talking about, they're just not there. Like, if you compare the United States to, like, Argentina, number one, it's a completely different country in terms of size.
No, all I'm saying is, it's good to see what happened there to get an idea of what happens. What is the consequences of this? Now, it's not like we said before. History does not repeat; it rhymes. So something similar can happen to us. Not the same, but similar. It's not like you do a bad thing and then the next year, the consequences. No, it can be 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years of bad policy, overspending, and then the collapse comes. Like I said, I have no idea when it's going to come, but if we continue what we're doing, it's going to come. And I think we've made a lot of enemies around the world, and they'd be more than happy to disconnect from us and do their own system.
it's still interesting to me that you kind of feel like this is one of those issues that you're so passionate about. But it doesn't have, in the event something did happen, perhaps, let's say like, gangs are roaming the streets, right? There's a run on the banks, there's a run in grocery stores, similar to like the pandemic. People have to stay at home, you can't congregate, can't go to public places. How do you deal with that?
I hope I hope I'm smart enough to leave. So this is the thing.
So you're talking about dual citizenship?
Yeah.
Where would you go?
Somewhere stable.
Like what?
I don't know. You're talking about a hypothetical time.
Yeah. So
it would be somewhere
go?
where English is spoken and
or good enough English.
Yeah, good enough English. Hopefully not too cold.
So you south of the equator.
Well, somewhere around the equator, hopefully. But yeah, if something like that was happening, there's a lot of times in...
Would Greenland pique your interest?
I heard it's a good place to go. A lot of looking.
It gets cold there,
a
though.
lot of things. Oh shit!
It gets really cold.
But they have hot springs, though, right? They're very volcanic.
You can't spend the
island.
entire winter in there.
If I build a house over the hot spring, like they do in Japan, Well, yes, I agree. Nobody cares about what I care about. And I'm very used to it.
Enough people care about it.
When I say nobody, you know what I mean. The vast majority of people, they go like you. Ho hum, who cares? We're spending money. Nothing's gonna happen. But I think that's our arrogance.
But the thing,
it'll come and bite us.
The budget was balanced, and in fact, we had a surplus during the Clinton years, and then George H.W. Bush got into office after Clinton, and then
that's another problem I see is that
the GWAT happened.
We cannot imagine in our human heads what a trillion is.
Sure we can. It's like 10 zeros.
No. And the fact that when they say, oh, it's 3 trillion debt, people are just like, okay, man. Or total debt's like 30-something trillion. Dude, do you know how that money is like
where
huge?
Would you be willing to make the cuts, though? Because...
everywhere. I would make everyone suffer.
Even yourself?
Yes.
So you're saying this is for the greater good. That's what you're saying.
Exactly. This would be a pill.
What type of philosophy is that?
But this is the thing.
What's the school of thought there? Utilitarianism?
No. This is the thing.
Kantism?
No. People.
Reichian?
People. This is the thing. Sometimes you have to do something, and everybody will hate you for it.
That again, but
it's like when Robert F. Kennedy takes sugar out of stuff. Or the sucrose and all that stuff starts taken out of our food, we're going to start crying. There's going to be many fat people who stumble outside their doors on their bad knees, and they're going to start crying. Okay? But it's the right thing to do.
Well, that's different than the debt. I mean, that's something that could actually kill you. The debt, it could go on for
fiscal,
our entire lifetime.
It's fiscal, fructal, high corn syrup crap.
And the way to balance the budget is what?
I'm not talking about balancing. I'm talking about cutting.
To get a balanced budget.
Yeah.
That's the end goal.
Well, I mean, hopefully this is what I would do, right?
No, but the end goal is to cut so that you can get to a surplus or at least balance the budget.
Yes, a surplus, because this is the thing. We have fires in California. We have hurricanes in Florida. We have countries like Israel that might need our help and all that stuff, right? And we give them money.
You don't even like war.
I know, but I'm just saying. Or Ukraine, right? They ask for money. Where's this money coming from? Does America have this backup savings account?
They buy it. They're buying the weapon just like Israel's buying.
I know, but we have a savings account and we're just loaning them money? No. We print the money. You understand what I'm saying? We take out the credit card and we say, sure, we got you. No.
Again, though, this is what... It's kind of... I think this is something that it could be an issue, but usually whenever there's something like this crops up, we're just like, well, we'll come up with a solution for it fairly quickly.
Yeah.
And that's usually what happens. That's American society.
That's no big deal.
That's the attitude. Is if something just like the space race, right? We found the money to compete with the Soviet Union, so we'll find the money to pay off our bills. And maybe that.
We'll just reach under the couch and
maybe,
pull it out. Yeah.
Well, maybe
yeah,
one way to do it is you increase taxes. So you'd be willing to do that? You'd be willing to take that hit on taxes?
This is the thing.
You said you'd be willing to suffer.
And I'll tell you why.
So you're not willing to suffer like that.
No,
you want other people to suffer.
No, what I'm saying... No, I'll make the government suffer. The people in the government are going to suffer big time.
Those are the other people.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is...
They have families.
The
they
idea...
have mortgages. They got to pay for bills.
Yeah, I know. And they're going to have to go into the open market, and they're going to have to get a real job.
So, that's an interesting point. Let's talk about it real quick. I read an article recently that basically said most of the jobs that exist in government are knowledge worker jobs, white collar jobs. Most of the jobs that exist in the private sector used to be software engineer jobs, but the software engineer jobs don't exist anymore. So you got, let's say, 250,000 to like 500,000, if not a million or so or more, people who are now entering the private market. But the private market can't absorb all these people. So what do? How do they survive? How do they live? And that could cause an economic crisis as well. That begets, as a result of the debt, it could lead to this confluence of negative events that feed off of each other and cannibalize each other, just like the housing market crisis. People were writing predatory loans for people who couldn't afford it.
Yeah, I mean that's
eventually
the 2008 crisis. All you have to do is watch up to it. When they go over, I remember when Peter Schiff was on the news channels all the time. It's like, listen, a housing crisis is coming. Come on, Peter, you say this all the time. Nothing's happening. Nothing happens until it does. Okay?
So you're banking on some hypothetical, fantastical, imaginary situation that you can't conceive of, but you know is coming.
It's like in Final Fantasy VII, right?
You really are a doomer.
I think like halfway through the game or so, there's like a gigantic meteorite in the sky. And you're playing the game and you're like, oh man, this thing is coming. We don't know when, but it's going to hit us, right? And so you're playing the game and you just see this giant meteorite out in the sky. You know it's coming towards Earth. That's what our debt is. It is a meteor out there. We don't know when it's going to hit us, but it's coming.
Right. This is doomerism thinking.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, it is. I've heard the other arguments from the other side of the aisle where they basically say, well, the next Pearl Harbor is coming. The next cyber Pearl Harbor. It's on the horizon.
No. The other side of this is, I forget what it's called, but there are people who say, like, why don't we just give everybody $1 million?
So that they'll spend it?
Yeah, it'll help the economy. Why not?
I put it in the bank and let it grow interest.
That's why not? Just give everybody money. It would help everybody. You'd pay off your house,
that's what
pay off your
wants
car.
to do, right?
No, I mean like give everyone like $1 million,
Yeah.
$2 million, $3 million. Doesn't matter.
You ask me what I think about that?
Yeah. Why not?
I mean, I wouldn't spend it.
I know, but why wouldn't you give everybody $1 million, $2 million, $3 million? Why
Well,
not?
that increases the debt. Too.
I know, but it doesn't matter. It's never going to cause a problem. So just do it. Oh my God, I'm a genius, right?
That doesn't make any sense.
Why not?
Well, because no one's going to do that.
I know, but why? Why? Once you figure out why, that's why I have a problem with it.
Well, I think the reason why conservatives don't want to give money to people is
Why don't the left?
The left wants to give money.
No, but why
They
doesn't
want
the
a
left
UBI.
say we are giving everybody? Not even Bernie Sanders would say this. Why don't we just give everybody $3 million? They could pay off their houses, their homes, their student debt. Why not? And then they save the rest, put the rest in the stock market. It would help our economy. Why wouldn't you do it?
No, I guess because you have to print it.
And what does that do to the value of money once you do that?
It devalues it because now there's too much of it floating around in the economy. But that's not what's going on right now.
What do you think making debt does?
Yeah, printing money, but that's not what you're talking about is different. There's economies of scale that exist. You can't compare Argentina's economy to ours, just like you can't compare the European Union to ours or individual countries to ours.
Yes, you're not telling me that. I know there's differences. I told you they're not the same, but they rhyme.
Yeah, and I'm not arguing that point, but I'm saying
That's what you just said.
Why do you care about it so much? You basically say that an imaginary scenario is coming, and you want to be prepared for it. I mean,
When did I say that?
You said that meteor is coming.
No! Listen, you think if 150 years of us overprinting money and taking on too much debt, I'm going to solve it, I'm going to fix it, I'm going to go out there and do something? I'm not delusional. I'm just saying it's coming. There's nothing I can do about it.
See, the thing, I get what you're saying. I understand where you're coming from. But my point is, like, look, this administration is in office for 4 years. No more. Whoever comes after them, maybe they continue the policies of the Trump administration, maybe they don't. So, you have 4 years of cutting. Maybe it gets us there.
Hypothetically.
Yeah.
Like I said, we will see.
Yeah, but you also have an issue with the labor market being out of whack because there's now all these new people entering the labor market because of all these cuts that are occurring, at least for the next 4 years. And how is that going to affect the economy, despite the debt? And because think about it, these people who are being laid off, they're applying for unemployment insurance. There's a cap on how much you can make based on what you were making. So how much you can pull from unemployment. But it's a pool. So the more people who are drawing from it, the more money they have to put into it to be able to pay for it. Who's paying for that? Employers, local, state, federal. So they're basically having to print money to pay people who have been laid off. Because there's a certain amount of time that you have that you can draw from it. That's the amount of time you have to get a new job.
Yeah.
So
But remember,
so
undocumented
does that help? But you're saying
people are
you're
being sent back,
You're
thus
saying
opening jobs
you're saying
to these poor people.
Yeah, that's nonsense. So you're saying that people need to suffer. Well, okay, people are going to suffer, but they're still drawing unemployment. They're still money has to be printed to fill up the unemployment pool that has now experienced a shock as a result of all these people being laid off. So
Okay, but would you be
you're
willing?
You're stealing from, how's the saying go? Stealing from Paul in order to pay
Peter. Yeah, but this is the thing. Would you be willing to pay somebody for 8 months so you don't have to pay for them for 20 years? Right? That's why, that's what Elon Musk is doing. Hey, I'll give you 8 months pay to leave. Why? Because I don't want you to be here in this job 20, 30 years from now and we're still paying you. So I will give you money to go. So you're saving money. If they give them 8 months, 8 months pay to
They
leave.
said they're going to honor it, but
There's
we'll see.
okay, let's say they do it, but why are they doing that? To save 10 years, 15 years, 20 years
I don't
of work.
see it that way.
Yep.
My take on it is that this is all Elon trolling the federal government because for years this guy has multiple businesses across industries that require federal regulation, and this is his moment, his opportunity, once in a lifetime opportunity perhaps, that he's able to take advantage of and stick it to the man. And I think that seems to be what he's trying to do. He's having a jolly old time doing it. He doesn't care about the people who are being laid off. He doesn't care.
You don't think Elon cares?
No.
What?
No. He's got SpaceX, he's got Tesla, he's got Neuralink, he's got now Twitter or X.
He's got 13 children.
He's got 13 children. I mean, he's got other things to focus on, and he doesn't care about these people that are being laid off. He has an axe to grind, and he's making sure that axe is embedded deep, because after 4 years, he's going to be on the chopping block.
Yes.
His head is going to be in the guillotine.
Yes, this is the time of vengeance.
And
you either get it out now,
he's-
or you're doomed.
Yeah, because he has his riches, he can hide behind a wall of security and build a high wall that nobody can climb.
He can move to any country he wanted to.
Sure, and he can protect himself after this 4 years. He's probably going to disappear.
He could buy a nuclear sub, go under Antarctica, wait it out.
Yeah, he can do whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know about that, but
I'm just saying, if it gets bad enough.
but he can weather the storm. But we'll have to see. I'm just saying, like, what you're saying, how you're thinking about this, I don't think it works out exactly the way you think. I think you want it to work out a certain way, and it's just like, man, I don't think that's the case. I think there's always a cost, right? There's a cost to cutting. the cost is, okay, people are going to lose their job. But then there's also a cost that has to be paid for that's going to increase the debt, which is you have to pay these people back if you honor the agreement of 8 months, because that money hasn't been allocated. Previous year's money for this year has already been appropriated. So for this year, you have to go back to Congress to get them more money to pay these people for 8 months to just not come into work. And that's going to increase the debt. So even if you're cutting your way all these contracts and jobs, and you're basically making some of these agencies defunct by not having them staffed and turning the lights off, and you're removing all the resources. So you can do all these things, but even if you're trying to cut your way to a balanced budget, you can't, because you're creating more debt, number one, by this buyout, and number two, unemployment insurance is going to run out quicker because it's a pool. So if you had, for instance, say 6 to 8 months to draw from unemployment insurance to find another job, you don't have that anymore. You may have 3 to 2 months because the system's being stressed. So then the people who are expecting that money to tide them over until they can get a new job, it's going to create more stress. I don't think it's possible to cut your way to a balanced budget. I think we should get rid of some things. I'm not going to argue with you on that point. There's a lot of things that should be cut. But how we do it, I think, should be intelligent, not just across the board. Because this is what happens now. And you're going to see it. At the end of the year, they're going to pass a budget. Probably like October. They're going to pass a budget. Yeah, Congress will.
October,
and you're going to see how much money has to be passed to pay these people. And I hope at that moment you'll see, like, well, it's still worth it. But I would hope you kind of think, well, if it's just going to increase the debt more to pay these people for 8 months,
yeah,
is it worth it?
But you don't understand.
I do understand.
But then you're not paying them the next year. And you're not paying them the next year after that. And you're not paying them the next year after that.
I get that. They're gone.
So if you pay
but you
extra
still,
1 year,
but
then you make savings the next 3 years.
How much do these people get paid?
I don't know.
That's exactly my point. You don't know.
Yeah.
So if you don't know how much each individual gets paid, and let's say someone's getting paid $200,000 for doing nothing. Okay. Now you have to allocate 8 months of pay for how many people are getting paid? 200,000.
I think they said they cut, what, 70-something thousand, right?
Huh?
It was 70-something thousand, right?
What do you mean?
That's how many people took the offer, right?
It was 75,000,
yeah. So 75,000 people
times
whatever the mean that they're being paid for 1 year.
Yeah.
Okay, you were going to pay. They were going to be paid anyway. If he hadn't made it in, they would have been paying it. So yeah, you pay them off. This year's budget, let's say it runs over, I would find the money for it, and I'd take it out of the military easily. Easily for me, military 50% cut. We're going to drone warfare. We already know we don't need modern tanks. We don't need modern planes. We don't need any of that stuff.
Don't need them until you need them.
Everyone knows that war is going to be switching to robots fighting robots. So that's not even how we're going to be fighting in the future anymore.
That's in the future, though. But to get to that point, you have to build the infrastructure that allows you to build the weaponry to fight those wars. We're not able to do that. We're not doing that right now. Let's assume that you're going to take from Peter to pay Paul. Are all Republicans going to be willing to accept cuts for the military?
No.
So you can't pass a budget anyway.
I
So you
know.
you can't pay these people for 8 months.
Listen, you don't understand. I agree with you 100%.
You can't pay these people for 8 months, and even if you want to cut the military, can you cut the military?
Listen, this is how I see it in my mind. We have a country of obese people who only eat candy and ice cream and drink soda. And you're coming to them and you're saying, we're taking away soda. We're taking away sugar. You're going to have to eat salads now. Riots would break out. People will want your head. Yes.
People yell, but they don't riot.
No, every side would be angry.
People
And that's what you're doing. When you say, we're going to be fiscally responsible from now on, people are going to lose their shit.
No, that's what's happening right now.
Yeah, and people will come along like you. That's not possible. I mean,
No, I'm not saying...
if we make a committee, maybe we can cut, 10, 20 billion, but it's not possible.
I'm not
so we just got to keep writing these
I'm
checks.
not saying it's not possible. I'm not saying we need to keep writing checks. I'm saying you can cut. But
strategically.
but if you're cutting only to create more debt
For 1 year.
because
If you owe them for 8 months,
that's not
1
true.
year.
Because when you go through a RIF, you had to follow steps. Have you looked into this? Like the process for conducting a reduction in force? No, most people haven't. But if you look at the steps that are required, you have to be precise with the reasons you're letting somebody go. And then you have to be precise with the reason you're letting somebody else go. And if, by the way, if you happen to have made a mistake with the reason that you let that person go, you got to bring all these other people back that you let go for the exact same reason.
No.
That's the way a reduction in force works.
See, the way I would do it, I would.
But it doesn't matter how you would do it.
No, I'm just saying.
It doesn't matter how you do
I
it
agree with what
because
you're
you have to follow the law.
No.
The reduction in
No, I don't.
force has to be followed according to law.
No, I don't.
There's already lawsuits that are cropping up
No.
as a result of this.
No. And this is something that
You
happened.
can't-
This happened in our past.
You can't.
Where I can't remember who's.
If you either respect the law or you don't. If you don't respect the law, that's fine.
I don't.
But
I don't remember when it happened, but I remember there was a time when the president wanted to do something. The judicial branch said you're not allowed to do it, and he said let them stop me, and he did it anyway.
What are you talking about?
I don't remember the specifics. I can find it, but I remember that being the case, and that's what I would do. I would say they're fired. You can bring your system up there. What are you gonna kill me? I'm the president of the United States.
So
I have the military. You shut your mouth. We're doing it.
So that's you're,
Dude, I go hardcore on those hoes.
Yeah, but you wouldn't.
And listen,
be
I would
president.
never get a second term.
You would be impeached.
And everybody would hate me. No.
No, you'd be impeached.
No, because they're going to be arresting you.
You'd be arrested
No.
because you're not following the Constitution. You basically are saying you don't respect the Constitution. That's what you're saying. Because you're basically saying you're going to usurp power for yourself just to achieve this one goal, which is to balance the budget. And in so doing, you're going to arrest and duly elected politicians who reflect the will of the people. And you're basically saying you don't respect the will of the people by arresting politicians. That doesn't matter. But these other people were elected as well.
I am representing the will of the people now.
Yeah, for president, not for individual
This is what
districts.
they wanted me to do. Now listen, what did Trump
You're
post?
being ridiculous.
Trump posted that quote from Napoleon, where he said, "When you're saving a nation, nothing's illegal," and he's goddamn right.
You know he was exiled to an
That's
island
where I
in
would
the
go to. I'd
Mediterranean.
be heading to the same island. Listen,
it has nice weather.
I'd be the most brutal, not to anybody in specific, but to all people. Equal brutality to get us on the right road.
Well, that's your perspective.
Everyone will suffer, but in the end, it'll be for good. It's unfortunate.
It doesn't make any sense. My take is this: there's ways to cut responsibly.
I don't believe it.
And how you do that needs to be intelligent.
I don't believe it.
And I'll give you an example. There are certain agencies like the ATF and the FBI. Why do they exist as separate agencies? Doesn't make any sense. I'd say that's a law enforcement branch, the ATF. FBI is a law enforcement branch. Bring them together. Put them in the same house.
And then what?
Disperse them and put them all over the different parts of the country where they're needed.
And then fire certain parts of management, get rid of buildings.
Yeah. You condense the organizations because what we saw in this last 4 years is a complete over-politicization and over-policing. Chasing crimes that aren't really even crimes. And what we could do then is put ATF, which is focused on alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, in the same house that is actually investigating the exact same things that the ATF is supposed to be investigating.
And how much money is that going to save?
Well, if you bring all these resources together, you start cutting. Okay. You can start cutting after you've made that merger.
How much do you think you get from it?
Well, labor is usually what costs a lot.
I know, like what? And we're spending like
time over time.
$3
I mean, I don't know what the budget is for the FBI or ATF. I'm sure it's like
I'm saying you'd have to do that to. I forget how many organizations are in the government, but there's hundreds.
There's tons of organizations that could be merged, but they exist separately. And the reason they exist separately is for security purposes.
So at some point during the Cold War, people thought they were so paranoid as a result of the Red Scare that they thought it would be better to separate out specific organizations to create isolation of information, and that information would not be able to get out, or at least to be more difficult to be leaked. So it made sense at the time, but we have programs that exist like continuous monitoring, continuous vetting. So what's the harm in bringing some of these organizations together if you have these programs in place to monitor individuals continuously? There isn't.
All right, hold on. Let's close her down. Close her down. It's 4:00. Okay, I would save the country by brutally, mendaciously, sadistically cutting the budget like a wild Tasmanian devil. And I would do it with no remorse, and I would let everyone hate me, and I wouldn't give a damn. You would go in there, the enlightened one. You would cut strategically. I'm sure they would let you do it. I'm sure nobody would resist and say, hey, there's an FBI headquarters in my state, and I wouldn't really like that to be merged over here in this other state. So, it would never happen. So I just want you to know that I'm right. Whew, okay. Anything else? Yeah. Yeah, tell them.
Well,
tell these hoes.
I mean, I don't think your plan would work.
How dare you?
You can't do these things unless you have support.